The whip cracked against the boy's back for the 15th time. Not a sound escaped his lips. In the torchlit courtyard of the Spartan barracks, 50 other boys aged 7 to 19 stood in perfect formation, watching their 13-year-old peer endure his punishment for stealing bread from the communal stores. The bronze studs on the leather whip caught flesh with each strike. Blood ran down his spine, pooling in the dust at his feet. His knuckles went white as he gripped the wooden post, but his face remained stone. The paidonomos, the master of boys, paused between strikes. His breathing came heavy in the pre-dawn air. Around him, the watching boys stood motionless, their naked bodies trembling not from the mountain cold but from something deeper. They knew this ritual. They had all felt the whip. But this morning was different. The boy being punished, Alexios, had broken the cardinal rule. Not the stealing. They were taught to steal. The crime was getting caught. Worse, he had taken from his own brothers, from the sacred stores that fed the Agoge. 20 lashes for theft, 20 more for stupidity. But the real punishment wasn't the whip. Another crack split the silence. 16. The younger boys in the front row flinched to spite themselves. A 7-year-old, fresh from his mother's arms just weeks ago, bit through his own lip to keep from crying out in sympathy. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. Better that than showing weakness. The paidonomos raised his arm again. The whip hung in the air, drops of blood falling like rain. Alexios's legs shook now, muscles failing after standing rigid for so long. But he would not fall. To fall was to fail. To fail was to die. If not here, then later, when weakness meant a Persian spear through your chest. Strike 17 landed across wounds still fresh. The sound was different now, wet leather meeting raw meat. In the ranks, an older boy remembered his own punishment 3 summers past. 30 lashes for showing mercy to a helot slave. He had screamed on the 23rd stroke. The shame still burned hotter than the scars. You've just witnessed something that should be impossible. A 13-year-old boy taking 40 lashes without making a sound. How did an entire civilization engineer children to endure pain that would break grown men? And why did this brutal system create the most feared warriors in human history? The answer begins 7 years earlier, when boys barely old enough to tie their own sandals took their first steps into a machine designed to destroy everything weak inside them. One morning changed everything. The morning started like any other for 7-year-old Alexios until the men in bronze armor arrived at his door. They stood in the doorway, their red cloaks catching the dawn light, helmets tucked under their arms. The tallest one spoke a single word to his mother. Time. His mother's face never changed. She had been preparing for this morning since the day he was born. 7 winters had passed. The law was absolute. Every Spartan boy belonged to the state from his 7th year forward. She gripped his small shoulder once, her fingers pressing hard enough to leave marks. No words of comfort, no tears, just that grip, then nothing. The bronze men didn't wait. They turned and began walking. Alexios followed because there was no other choice. Down the stone streets of Sparta, past houses where other boys were emerging with the same confused terror in their eyes. Some cried. Most didn't dare. The sound of sandaled feet on stone grew louder as more boys joined the march. 20, 30, 47. By the final count, their breathing came quick and shallow, the only sign of fear these children allowed themselves. Behind them, mothers watched from doorways. Not one called out, not one followed. At the barracks gate, everything stopped. The lead hoplite turned to face the gathered boys. His scarred face showed nothing as he studied them. Some met his gaze, others stared at their feet. Both responses were wrong, though they wouldn't learn that until later. Strip. The word cut through the morning air. 47 boys stood frozen. The hoplite's hand moved to his whip. That was all the encouragement needed. Tunics fell to the dust, sandals kicked aside. Any jewelry, any token from home, anything that marked them as individuals dropped to the ground. The pile grew. A carved wooden horse one boy's father had made. A small bronze pendant blessed by a grandmother. These weren't just possessions. They were the last threads connecting these children to their former lives. The hoplites gathered everything into leather sacks. The boys would never see these items again. Naked now, shivering in the mountain air, they looked even younger. Ribs showed on the smaller ones. Baby fat still clung to others. The hoplite, who had given the order, walked down the line, examining each boy like a merchant inspecting goods. He stopped at one child who couldn't stop his tears. "You," his finger pointed. "First herd." The sorting began. No explanation of what the herds meant. No comfort for the terrified. Boys were divided by some criteria known only to their assessors. Size didn't seem to matter. Neither did apparent strength. The smallest boy might stand next to the largest. The divisions cut across all logic the children understood. 5 herds of roughly 10 boys each. As the last child found his place, older boys emerged from the barracks. These wore the same, nothing as the new arrivals, but their bodies told different stories. Scars cross-hatched their backs. Muscles moved under sun-darkened skin. Their eyes held something the 7-year-olds couldn't name yet. Each older boy took position before a herd. These were the protopaids, the assistant trainers. Barely teenagers themselves. They would serve as the immediate authority over the new recruits. The youngest looked perhaps 14. His herd of 7-year-olds stared up at him like he was a titan. "I am Theron," he said. His voice hadn't fully changed yet, cracking slightly on the words. "You belong to me now. Your mothers are dead. Your fathers are dead. Your names are dead. You are nothing until the Agoge makes you something." A boy in the second row opened his mouth to protest. Theron moved faster than thought. His fist caught the child in the stomach. The boy doubled over, gasping. Theron grabbed his hair, yanked him upright. "First lesson. You speak when spoken to. You breathe when allowed to breathe." He released the boy, who swayed but remained standing. "Follow me." The 5 herds split off, each following their assigned protopaids deeper into the barracks complex. Theron's group passed through stone corridors that echoed with their footsteps. No decorations on the walls. No comforts of any kind. Just stone and shadows, and the sound of their own breathing. They emerged into a courtyard where older boys were already training. The clash of bronze on bronze filled the air. Bodies slammed into dust. Blood spattered the ground from split lips and broken noses. The new arrivals tried not to stare. They failed. Theron led them past the training ground to a low building that smelled of straw and sweat. Inside, wooden platforms lined the walls. No mattresses, no blankets. Just hard wood, worn smooth by generations of boys who had slept here before them. "Choose a place," Theron commanded. "It's yours until you die or graduate." The boys scrambled to claim spots, though they all looked identical. Some instinct made them cluster together, seeking comfort in proximity. Theron watched with something like amusement. They would learn soon enough that comfort was the enemy. A bronze bell rang somewhere in the complex. Theron's expression changed. "First meal. Follow. Stay silent. Watch the older boys. Copy everything they do. Make a mistake, and you won't eat today." They filed out again, joining streams of other boys heading toward a central building. The new arrivals stood out painfully, their soft bodies and frightened eyes marking them as fresh meat. Older boys watched them pass with expressions ranging from pity to predatory interest. The mess hall was a cave of noise and motion. Long tables stretched the length of the room. Boys sat in strict age order, the youngest at tables near the door. Theron pointed to empty spaces on a bench. His herd scrambled to sit. What followed was a lesson in hierarchy. Older boys were served first. The portions grew smaller as the servers worked down the age groups. By the time they reached the 7-year-olds, the barley gruel was thin, the black broth mostly water, one small piece of bread, nothing more. A boy named Nicomedes stared at his portion in dismay. At home, even during lean times, he had eaten better than this. His stomach, accustomed to his mother's cooking, cramped at the sight of the watery mess. He raised his wooden spoon, then stopped. Around him, the other new boys were already eating with desperate efficiency. They had understood what he was only beginning to grasp. This wasn't poverty, this was design. They were being taught hunger as a constant companion. The meal lasted exactly as long as it took the oldest boys to finish. When they stood, everyone stood. Bowls empty or not, Nicomedes had managed 3 bites. His stomach raged at him as they filed out. Theron noticed his mostly full bowl but said nothing. The lesson would teach itself soon enough. Back in their sleeping quarters, the 7-year-olds finally had a moment without immediate supervision. They huddled together on the platforms, whispering in the dim light. Names were exchanged. Homes compared. Tears finally fell now that no one could see. "I want my mother," one boy whispered. Others nodded. The shared admission created a tiny bond. They were all afraid. They all wanted home. But home was as dead as Theron had promised. An older boy appeared in the doorway. Not Theron, but another Protopades. He studied the huddled group with cold eyes. Talking after silence bell is 20 strikes, each. He left without another word. The 7-year-olds froze. No one had told them about a silence bell. They hadn't heard any bell since the meal call. But ignorance wasn't a defense here. It was just another failure to adapt. They spent the rest of the daylight hours in a blur of introductions to their new life. The training grounds where they would learn to fight. The running paths where they would build endurance. The workshops where they would maintain weapons. Each location came with 100 unspoken rules they were expected to divine through observation. As the sun began to set, Theron gathered his herd in the courtyard. They had been awake since before dawn, marched from their homes, stripped of everything familiar, fed a starvation meal, threatened with beatings. The exhaustion showed in their sagging shoulders. "Tonight you learn your first real lesson," Theron said. His adolescent voice carried surprising authority. "The Agoge has many rules, you know none of them. But ignorance is not forgiven. Every mistake carries a price." He produced a whip from his belt, smaller than the ones the adult trainers carried, but the leather was still studded with bronze. The 7-year-old's eyes went wide. Surely he didn't mean to use it on them. Not on their first day. They were just children. Who spoke after the silence bell? The question hung in the air. The boys looked at each other. No one wanted to be the first to confess, but neither did anyone want to be caught lying. The silence stretched until it became its own form of torture. Finally, one boy stepped forward, then another. Within moments, all 10 stood in a ragged line. They had all whispered, all broken a rule they didn't know existed. Theron nodded as if this was expected. "Good. Honesty might reduce the count." Protopades Deon said 20 strikes. "I'll make it 10. This time." What followed was their first taste of Spartan justice. 10 strikes sounds like nothing to those who have never felt the whip. But for 7-year-old boys who had never known real pain, it was a revelation. The first child screamed on the 3rd strike. By the 5th, he was sobbing openly. Theron never slowed. One by one, they took their turns. Some lasted longer than others before breaking. None made it to 10 without sounds of pain. Their backs, unmarked that morning, now bore the first of what would become a lifetime of scars. As the last boy stumbled away from the whipping post, clutching his bleeding back, Theron addressed them again. "Tomorrow you'll learn the rest of the rules. Breaking them will hurt worse than this. Questions?" No one dared speak. They had learned that much at least. "Good. To your platforms. No food until morning. No talking. No crying loud enough to disturb the older boys." He paused at the doorway. "Welcome to the Agoge." The door closed with finality. 10 7-year-old boys stood in gathering darkness, processing what had just happened. That morning they had been children with names and families and futures they thought they understood. Now they were something else. Not yet Spartans, but no longer truly human either. As they climbed onto their hard platforms, trying to find positions that didn't press against fresh whip marks, the full weight of their situation began to settle. 13 years stretched ahead of them. 13 years of hunger and pain, and lessons written in blood. Some wouldn't survive. The weak would break or die. Only the strongest would emerge as full Spartan citizens. In the darkness, someone whimpered. Others joined. They pressed together for warmth and comfort, these children who had been torn from everything soft in their lives. By morning, the tears would be done. They would have to be, because tears were weakness, and weakness was death. Outside their window, they could hear the older boys still training. The clash of weapons continued long into the night. Occasionally, a trainer's voice would bark orders. Once, they heard someone scream, the sound cutting off abruptly. No one went to investigate. No one would explain come morning. The 7-year-olds lay awake, stomachs cramping from hunger, backs burning from the whip, hearts aching for mothers who would never comfort them again. This was their first night in the Agoge. It was the easiest night they would ever have. As exhaustion finally claimed them, pulling them into fitful sleep, none could have guessed at the transformations ahead. The systematic breaking down of every human instinct, the rebuilding of their minds and bodies into weapons, the bonds they would forge with each other that would prove stronger than bronze. But that was all to come. For now, they were just frightened children learning their first lesson in Spartan education. Pain was the teacher, survival was the only passing grade, and morning would come too soon, bringing fresh agonies they couldn't yet imagine. In the corner of the room, young Alexios pressed his face into the wooden platform to muffle his sobs. In 6 years, he would steal bread and take 40 lashes without a sound. But tonight he was 7 and afraid and missing his mother's voice. The transformation from one to the other would cost him everything he thought he was. The moon rose over the barracks, casting shadows through the windows. Somewhere in the complex, a wolf howled, though whether it was animal or human none of the new boys could tell. They huddled closer, these cubs who had become wolves themselves. As night fell on their first day, the real training hadn't even begun, because first they had to survive until morning. The screams started just after midnight. Not from pain. The sound ripped through the sleeping quarters like bronze tearing silk. 10 7-year-olds jerked awake on their hard platforms, whip wounds still burning against the wood. In the darkness, shapes moved. Older boys, 15 or 16 years old, slipping between the platforms like shadows. "Fresh meat," a voice whispered. The words carried promises that made young stomachs clench. These weren't the protopaeders who had guided them during daylight. These were something else. Hunters moving through familiar territory. A hand grabbed Alexios by the ankle. He bit down on his tongue to keep from crying out. The grip was iron, dragging him toward the platform edge. Around him, other 7-year-olds were experiencing the same. Some fought, most froze. Both responses were wrong. The older boy who held Alexios leaned close. His breath smelled of the black broth and something metallic. "First night tradition, little lamb. You run, we chase. You get caught." He let the silence finish the threat. They were hauled to their feet, all 10 of them, shaking in the cold air. The older boys formed a loose circle, cutting off escape routes. One of them, broader than the rest with scars that caught the moonlight, stepped forward. His voice was soft, which made it worse. "The paidonomos sleeps. The protopaeders sleep. But we don't sleep. We hunt." He smiled, teeth white in the darkness. "You have until I finish counting to find somewhere to hide. Anywhere in the barracks. Get caught, and you'll learn why even the trainers fear the night watch." The counting began. 1. The 7-year-olds scattered like startled deer. Bare feet slapped against stone as they fled into the corridors. Behind them, the older boys laughed. The sound echoed off walls, multiplying until it seemed to come from everywhere. 2. Alexios ran blind, hands outstretched to feel for walls. His eyes hadn't adjusted to the complete darkness of the inner barracks. Somewhere to his left, another boy stumbled and fell. The crash was tremendous in the silence. Footsteps immediately changed direction toward the sound. 3. A hand grabbed his shoulder. Alexios almost screamed before recognizing another 7-year-old. They clung to each other, 2 frightened children trying to become invisible. Together, they fumbled forward, seeking any refuge from what was coming. 4. They found a doorway. Inside, the smell hit them first. Leather and oil and old sweat. The armory. Racks of equipment lined the walls, creating shadows within shadows. They pressed themselves behind a stand of shields, trying to control their breathing. 5. The counting stopped. In the silence that followed, every sound seemed amplified. Their hearts hammered so loud surely everyone could hear. Somewhere in the building, a door creaked open. Then another. The hunt had begun. Footsteps moved through the corridors with practiced ease. The older boys knew every corner, every hiding place. They had been the prey once. Now they were the predators, and they moved like it. Confident, patient, inevitable. A scream echoed from somewhere above them, high and terrified before it cut off abruptly. First blood to the hunters. In their hiding spot, Alexios and his companion pressed closer together. The shields they crouched behind suddenly seemed like the flimsiest protection. More sounds filtered through the night. Running feet. A crash as someone knocked something over. Laughter from the hunters. They were enjoying this. These older boys who had survived their own first nights years ago. Now it was their turn to teach the lesson. The armory door opened. Both hidden boys stopped breathing. Footsteps entered, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was wasn't searching randomly. They knew the room, knew where frightened children might hide. The steps came closer. "I can smell you," the voice said. Casual, amused. "Fear has a scent, little lambs. You'll learn to hide it eventually, but not tonight." The footsteps stopped directly in front of their shield rack. In the darkness, they could just make out a shape looming above them. The hunter had found them without even trying. Experience against terror was no contest. Out. They crawled out, legs shaking. The older boy studied them with the same dispassionate interest Theron had shown earlier. He was perhaps 16, muscle corded across his frame, every inch a warrior in training. Next to him, the 7-year-olds looked like exactly what they were. Prey. Two at once. Efficient. He gestured toward the door. Back to the common room. Move. They stumbled ahead of him, his presence at their backs worse than any whip. In the corridors they passed other pairs. Hunters leading captured prey. One 7-year-old had a bloody nose. Another limped. The night watch hadn't been gentle. The common room was lit by a single oil lamp. In its wavering light, the court boys were being arranged in a line. 6 so far. 8 with Alexios and his companion. 2 still free somewhere in the building. But the hunters were patient. They had all night. The scarred boy who had done the counting surveyed the catches. His expression showed neither cruelty nor mercy. Just assessment. 8 of 10. Faster than last year's crop. He turned to the assembled hunters. Who found them together? The boy who had caught Alexios stepped forward. Armory. Behind the aspis rack. Clever. Shows their thinking. The scarred boy approached the two who had hidden together. Names? They hesitated. Hadn't Theron said their names were dead? But the older boy's expression suggested this wasn't the time for philosophy. Alexios, one whispered. Proclus, said the other. Alexios and Proclus. You worked together. Good instinct. But you hid in the first place you found. Bad tactics. He moved down the line, critiquing each capture. You ran in a straight line. Easy tracking. You tried to climb. Fell. Made noise. You froze completely. Might as well have surrendered. A commotion in the doorway announced the 9th capture. The boy was carried in, fighting every step. He bit and clawed and tried to kick, earning nothing but laughter from his captors. They dumped him with the others, where he crouched like a feral animal. 9 of 10, the scarred boy noted. 1 still free. Impressive. Minutes passed. Then more. The hunters who remained in the room grew restless. Surely one 7-year-old couldn't evade them all. But as time stretched, it became clear that somewhere in the barracks, one new boy was doing exactly that. Enough. The scarred boy made a decision. Damanon wins the night. Wherever he's hiding, he's earned it. He turned back to the 9 captives. The rest of you failed. Failure requires education. The older boys moved with smooth practice. The 7-year-olds found themselves arranged in a circle, facing outward. The hunters took positions behind them. What followed was a lesson in systematic humiliation. Crawl, came the command. They crawled. Faster. They scrabbled on hands and knees, moving in their circle like animals. The older boys walked beside them, occasionally nudging with their feet when someone slowed. Barked like dogs. Some hesitated. Those earned kicks. Soon, 9 young voices were barking, crawling, performing like trained beasts while their tormentors laughed. Tears flowed freely now, but they kept moving. Stopping would be worse. Stand. They stood, legs shaking from exhaustion and shame. You are prey tonight because you think like prey. Run when chased, hide when frightened, obey when caught. The scarred boy moved to the center of their circle. Tomorrow, you begin learning to think like predators, but tonight, you're rabbits, and rabbits serve one purpose. He nodded to the other hunters. What followed was worse than the crawling. Each 7-year-old was assigned to an older boy as a personal servant for the remainder of the night. Fetch water, massage sore muscles from the day's training, clean equipment, every task designed to reinforce their absolute powerlessness. Alexios found himself assigned to the boy who had caught him. For the next 3 hours, he ran errands through the dark barracks. His feet bled from the stone floors, his hands cramped from scrubbing bronze, but he didn't dare slow. The older boy's patience had limits, and finding them would hurt. As dawn approached, exhaustion made every movement agony. The 7-year-olds had been awake all night after their first grueling day. Their bodies, soft from childhood, were reaching collapse. Still the tasks continued. The older boys pushed them to the edge, then slightly past. Finally, with the first grey light touching the windows, the scarred boy called an end. 9 7-year-olds stood swaying on their feet, covered in sweat and dust and shame. They had survived their first night, but at a cost none had expected. "Back to your quarters," the scarred boy commanded. "The morning horn sounds in 1 hour. Miss Formation and the paidonomos will want to know why." He smiled at their horror. 1 hour of sleep after a night of torment. "Oh, and little lambs, tomorrow night we hunt again, and again, every night until you learn to evade, or until you break." They stumbled back to their platforms, past the empty space where Damanon should have been. Where had he hidden? How had he evaded 16 experienced hunters in their own territory? The questions burned, but exhaustion won. They collapsed onto the wood, not even feeling their whip wounds anymore. 50 minutes later, when the bronze horn shattered the air, 9 boys struggled upright. Muscles screamed, eyes refused to focus, but they stood, because not standing meant punishment. They had learned that much at least. Theron appeared in the doorway, fresh and alert. His eyes took in their condition without comment. Formation in the courtyard. 2 minutes. He paused, then added, "Well done surviving the night watch. Most years we lose 1 or 2 on the first hunt." He left them to process that. Some boys died on their first night. Not from the training, not from the whips, from the other boys. From the system designed to cull the weak before they could contaminate the strong. As they stumbled toward the courtyard, Damanon emerged from somewhere, looking as exhausted as the rest. He wouldn't say where he had hidden. That knowledge was his advantage for the nights ahead. But his eyes held something new. Not pride exactly. Understanding. He had learned the game's real rules. In the courtyard, they joined their formation. Other groups of 7-year-olds looked similarly destroyed. The night watch had visited them all. It was tradition. They would learn. Every new class faced the hunters. Most failed for weeks before learning to truly disappear. The paidonomos stood before them, his scarred face revealing nothing about the night's activities. He knew, of course. Everything that happened in the Agoge happened with tacit approval. The night hunts served their purpose, teaching fear, teaching helplessness, then teaching how to overcome both. "Yesterday you learned that ignorance has a price." His voice carried across the courtyard. "Last night you learned that weakness has a higher one. Tonight you'll learn that only the clever survive. But first, morning training." What followed was torture for exhausted children, running on legs that barely functioned, calisthenics with muscles already pushed past limits, combat drills where they could barely lift the practice weapons. The trainers showed no mercy for their condition. Mercy was not a Spartan virtue. By midday meal, 3 boys had collapsed. They were revived with cold water and kicks, then forced to continue. The black broth tasted like ambrosia to empty stomachs, but the portions remained tiny. Hunger gnawed at them, made worse by exhaustion. "Eat quickly," Theron advised his group. "Afternoon brings your first lesson in pancration. The trainers like to see blood on the first day." Alexios forced down his meager portion while his mind reeled. Wrestling and boxing after no sleep, with bodies already breaking down? It seemed impossible. But around him, Older boys prepared eagerly for the afternoon's violence. This was normal here. This was life. The meal ended too soon. Back to the training grounds where combat instructors waited. These men were different from the morning trainers. Scarred, brutal. Veterans of real war who would teach children to fight like demons. Their eyes promised pain. As they formed up for instruction, Alexios caught sight of the night watch boys from earlier. They trained with their age group, showing no signs of their nighttime activities. By day, they were students. By night, they were predators. The transformation was seamless. "Partner up," a trainer barked. The 7-year-olds fumbled to obey. Alexios found himself facing a boy named Leontis who could barely stand. They would have to fight each other while exhausted. The stronger would hurt the weaker. Another lesson. The instructor demonstrated holds and strikes with casual efficiency. His assistant, a boy of perhaps 12, served as a practice dummy. Even held back, the blows clearly hurt. The assistant never flinched. That was the standard they were expected to reach. Begin. What followed was less combat than clumsy brawling. Exhausted children grabbing and striking with no skill. But the trainers wanted aggression more than technique on this first day. They walked among the pairs, correcting stances with sharp blows from wooden rods. Alexios took an elbow to the mouth. Blood filled his mouth, hot and metallic. Rage flared, surprising him. He struck back harder, catching Leontis in the stomach. The other boy doubled over, and Alexios followed with a wild swing that connected with his ear. "Better," the instructor noted in passing. "Anger is fuel, but controlled anger is a weapon." Again. They fought until they could barely stand. Blood from split lips and noses painted the dust. Bruises bloomed on exposed skin. And through it all, the terrible understanding grew. This was day 2. They had 13 years ahead. When the instructor finally called a halt, several boys were crying openly, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of their future. The weak ones, the ones who wouldn't last. Everyone could see it already. The divide between those who would adapt and those who would break. As they limped toward the barracks, Theron fell into step beside Alexios. "You fought well for someone so tired. The night watch reported you hid together with Procles. Smart. But tonight they'll expect that. Tonight you'll need a new strategy." The words hit like cold water. Tonight, they would be hunted again tonight, and the next night, and the next, until they learned to evade or until they broke. No rest, no recovery. Just constant pressure designed to forge them or destroy them. In their quarters, the boys collapsed on their platforms. Some tended wounds, others just stared at nothing, minds trying to process their new reality. In 2 days, they had learned more about suffering than in their entire previous lives. "I know where Damanon hid," Procles whispered suddenly. The others turned toward him, desperate for any advantage. "I saw him slip into the grain stores during the chase. Burrowed into the barley. Brilliant, really. The older boys would never think to dig through food supplies." The information spread through whispers. Tonight, some would try the same trick. Of course, now that it was known, the hunters would check there first. But it gave them hope. If Damanon could evade capture, so could they. Maybe. As afternoon faded toward evening, dread settled over the barracks like a shroud. The older boys went about their routines, but the 7-year-olds could see them watching, memorizing faces, planning tonight's hunt. The predators were already preparing. During evening meal, Alexios forced himself to think. Running hadn't worked. Hiding in obvious places hadn't worked. But Damanon had found a third option. Somewhere the hunters wouldn't think to look. He needed to be equally creative or face another night of humiliation. The portions seemed even smaller tonight. Or maybe hunger was just becoming their constant companion. Around him, boys wolfed down their bread and broth like animals. Table manners were already disappearing. Survival took precedence over civilization. As they prepared for sleep, if it could be called that, Theron made his rounds. He stopped at each platform, checking whip wounds for infection, offering sparse advice. At Alexios's spot, he paused longer. The hunters were impressed you found the armory in complete darkness. Shows good instincts. He leaned closer, voice dropping. But instincts aren't enough. Think like them. Where would you never look for prey? He moved on without waiting for an answer, but the seed was planted. Where would predators never look for prey? The answer seemed impossible. They knew every corner of their territory. Unless the horn for lights out sounded. Oil lamps were extinguished throughout the barracks. Darkness fell like a hammer. In their quarters, 10 boys lay rigid on their platforms, waiting for the horror to begin again. Some had plans, most had only fear. Time crawled. Every sound might be the hunters approaching. Every shadow could hide an older boy. The anticipation was almost worse than the actual hunt. At least when it started, they could act. This waiting was its own torture. Then, like the night before, the scream came. But this time it was expected, the signal that sent them scattering into the darkness. As Alexios ran, his mind raced through possibilities. Where would predators never look for prey? The answer came as he passed the training grounds. Predators wouldn't look where other predators gathered. The older boys' quarters. It was insane, suicidal, which made it perfect. He changed direction, bare feet silent on stone. Behind him the sounds of the hunt began, but Alexios was already committed to his desperate plan. Either it would work, or he would face punishment worse than simple capture. The older boys' section was different. Larger rooms, actual possessions, the trappings of earned privilege. Most were empty, their occupants out hunting, but some remained. The ones not interested in tormenting children, the ones focused on tomorrow's training. Alexios slipped past occupied rooms, heart threatening to burst from his chest. If caught here, the punishment would be severe. This was forbidden territory for new boys, but that was exactly why it might work. He found what he was looking for at the corridor's end. A storage room filled with training equipment. But not just any equipment. The gear used for tomorrow's exercises. The older boys would need this at dawn. They wouldn't think to search it. As he burrowed behind practice shields and wooden swords, Alexios allowed himself a moment of pride. He was thinking like them now, using their assumptions against them. It was a tiny victory, but after 2 days of constant defeat, it felt monumental. Outside, the hunt continued. Screams and running feet echoed through the barracks. But here, in the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by the tools of war, one 7-year-old boy had found safety. For tonight at least, the transformation had begun. From prey to predator, from child to warrior. It would take 13 years to complete. But on this night, in this moment, Alexios had taken the first real step. He had learned to think like a Spartan. By dawn, every boy understood one truth. Their greatest enemy wasn't the Persians or even their instructors. It was their own hunger. The daily ration could fit in a child's palm. Black broth that looked like mud. A fist of barley that wouldn't fill a bird's stomach. One small piece of bread, hard as stone. The 7-year-olds stared at their portions in growing horror as the awful truth settled into their bones. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't punishment. This was their life now. Alexios watched the older boys eat with mechanical efficiency. They didn't savor or complain or even seem to notice the meager portions. Their bodies had adapted, lean and hard as bronze. But his stomach cramped and raged, demanding the meals his mother used to serve. Honey cakes, fresh figs, meat that wasn't mostly gristle and despair. The trainers ate the same portions. No special treatment for rank or age. Everyone in the Agoge survived on starvation rations, from the youngest recruit to the battle-scarred instructors. The lesson was clear. Spartans needed less than other men. Less food, less comfort, less of everything that made life soft. By the 3rd day, the hunger had teeth. It gnawed at their bellies during training, making them weak when they needed strength. It kept them awake at night, adding another layer to their exhaustion. Some boys cried in their sleep, dreaming of their mothers' kitchens. The 4th day brought revelation. During morning formation, Theron pulled 2 boys from the line. Their crime became clear when he produced bread from their tunics. Extra rations they had somehow acquired. "Stealing is encouraged," Theron announced, loud enough for all to hear. "But stupidity is not." The whip fell 20 times on each boy. Not for theft, for getting caught, for hiding the evidence poorly. for failing to understand the true lesson hidden in their systematic starvation. That afternoon, the Paidonamos himself addressed all the 7-year-olds. His scarred face showed something that might have been approval as he studied their gaunt features. Already, they looked different. Hollow cheeks, prominent ribs, the baby fat of childhood melting away. "You wonder why we starve you," he said. It wasn't a question. Soft boys with full bellies become soft men. Soft men die on Persian spears. But hungry boys, he smiled, and it was terrible. Hungry boys become wolves. He gestured to the older trainees practicing combat nearby. Watch them, learn from them. They've mastered the first rule of survival. Take what you need, just don't get caught. The permission was implicit but clear. They were expected to supplement their rations through theft, from the kitchens, from the town, from each other if necessary. But discovery meant the whip, and the whip meant scars that would mark them as failures forever. That night, 3 boys tried to raid the kitchens. The cook, a massive veteran missing his left arm, caught them immediately. Their screams echoed through the barracks as they received their education in stealth, or rather, their education in the lack of it. Alexios lay on his platform, listening to their punishment, his mind working through possibilities. The direct approach had failed. The kitchens were too well guarded. The storerooms were locked and checked. But there had to be other sources, other ways. The next morning brought inspiration from an unexpected source. During weapons training, an older boy named Lysander dropped a small leather pouch. Dried meat spilled out, not from the Agoge kitchens, from somewhere else. The boy quickly gathered it up, but not before several hungry eyes took note. After training, Alexios trailed Lysander at a distance. The older boy moved with purpose, leaving the barracks grounds entirely. This was forbidden for 7-year-olds, but hunger made rules seem less important. Alexios followed through Sparta's streets, keeping to shadows. Lysander's destination surprised him. Not a market or home, but a shrine to Artemis. The goddess of the hunt received offerings from successful hunters, fresh kills, preserved meats, foods that spoiled if not taken. Lysander helped himself to the goddess's portion with practiced ease. Brilliant, sacrilegious to most Greeks, but the Spartans had different relationships with their gods. The gods respected strength and cunning. Taking their offerings was just another test. If you could steal from heaven itself, you deserved to eat. Alexios waited until Lysander left, then crept forward. The shrine held treasures beyond imagining. Dried venison, fresh bread from morning offerings, even honey cakes, though these were already attracting flies. His hands shook as he filled his tunic. The journey back tested every nerve. Each person he passed might expose him. Each step could bring disaster, but he made it, slipping into the barracks just before evening formation. The food hidden in his sleeping quarter would last days if he was careful. That night, he ate in darkness, tiny portions to make it last. The dried meat was tough as leather but tasted like ambrosia. His stomach, so long empty, almost rebelled at the sudden richness, but he forced himself to chew slowly, savoring every morsel. Procles noticed first. The boy's keen eyes caught Alexios's improved energy during morning drills. That evening, he cornered him in the washing area. "You found something," he whispered. Not accusation, desperate hope. Alexios hesitated. Sharing meant less for himself, but he remembered their first night, hiding together in the armory. Bonds forged in terror ran deep. He told Procles about the shrine, warning him to wait several days before trying. Too many thefts would bring attention. Within a week, half their group knew the secret. They developed a rotation, each boy taking turns at different shrines throughout Sparta. The gods had many altars, and all received offerings. It became a game of timing and nerve. Who could take the most without detection? But games have winners and losers. Nicomedes grew too bold, hitting the same shrine 3 times in 5 days. The priests noticed the pattern. They didn't catch him directly, but word reached the Paidonamos. The next morning, every 7-year-old found their already meager rations cut in half. "Someone has been stealing from the gods," the Paidonamos announced. His tone suggested pride rather than anger. "Good, but you were sloppy. The city complains, so you all pay the price." learn to be better thieves, or learn to survive on even less. Half rations broke some boys completely. They stumbled through training, collapsing from weakness. The instructors showed no mercy. If anything, they pushed harder, demanding the same performance on less fuel. Natural selection in its purest form. Desperation bred innovation. Boys learned to catch rats in the barracks. They discovered which plants around the training ground were edible. They traded services to older boys for food scraps. Anything to fill the endless void in their bellies. One boy, named Callistos, developed a different strategy. He noticed that during communal meals, the servers sometimes spilled broth or dropped bread. While others focused on their portions, Callistos positioned himself to catch these accidents. Sometimes he even helped them happen, jostling a server's elbow at the right moment. The servers knew, of course, but they admired the cunning. As long as he wasn't obvious, they allowed it. Another lesson in the complex rules of Spartan society. Cleverness earned rewards. Stupidity earned the whip. As weeks passed, the boys' bodies transformed. The weak ones grew weaker, some disappearing from training entirely, sent home in shame or worse. But the strong adapted. Their metabolisms slowed. Their senses sharpened. They learned to function on nothing, to find strength in hunger itself. Alexios discovered he could smell food from impossible distances, fresh bread from the city bakeries, meat roasting in homes they passed. The scents tortured and motivated in equal measure. Each meal stolen tasted better for the effort required to obtain it. The night raids evolved into elaborate operations. Boys worked in teams, one creating distractions while others grabbed food. They learned guard patterns, memorized which citizens left offerings when. They became ghosts in their own city, invisible thieves surviving on divine leftovers and human carelessness. But the greatest thefts happened within the barracks itself. Older boys had larger rations and sometimes hoarded food. Stealing from them required incredible courage. The punishment, if caught, wouldn't come from instructors but from the victims themselves, and they had years of experience in making suffering memorable. Alexios watched and learned. He noticed that after particularly brutal training sessions, even the older boys collapsed exhausted. Those nights, their quarters became hunting grounds for the desperate and brave. A piece of dried meat here, a hidden cache of nuts there, never enough to be noticed immediately. The first time he stole from a 16-year-old's personal stash, his heart nearly exploded from fear. But he escaped undetected, and the small handful of barley felt like the greatest victory of his young life. He had taken from a predator. He was becoming one himself. 3 months into their training, the 7-year-olds looked like different creatures entirely. Skin stretched tight over visible bones, eyes sunken but burning with desperate intelligence. They moved differently too, quiet as cats, always watching, always calculating. During a rare rest day, Proclus made an observation that chilled them all. "We're becoming like them," he said, watching older boys spar. "Not stronger. We're too young for that, but our minds. We think like starving wolves now, always hunting, always hungry." He was right. The constant deprivation had rewired their brains. They no longer thought about toys or games or their mother's voices. They thought about food, where to find it, how to take it, how to hide it. Every waking moment devoted to the basic need to survive. The instructors watched this transformation with satisfaction. This was the point. Not just to create strong bodies, but minds that could function under any deprivation. Soldiers who could march for days on empty stomachs. Warriors who saw hunger as another enemy to defeat through cunning. One morning, Theron gathered his group for a different lesson. He produced a small loaf of bread, fresh enough that the smell made their mouths water. Then he divided it into 10 pieces. But the portions were deliberately unequal. Some large, some barely crumbs. "Choose," he said simply. The scramble was immediate and vicious. Boys who had shared sleeping quarters for months fought like animals for the larger pieces. Alexios found himself wrestling Nicomedes for a middle-sized portion. They rolled in the dust, clawing and biting, forgotten friendship consumed by hunger. When the dust settled, some boys clutched their prizes while others nursed empty hands and new bruises. Theron watched without expression. "Every meal in war comes like this," he said. "The strong eat, the weak starve. Better you learn now." But the lesson went deeper. That night, the boys who had won nothing banded together. They pooled their knowledge, shared intelligence about food sources, created a network of mutual survival. The boys who had grabbed the largest portions found themselves isolated, hoarding their temporary victory. Within days, the cooperative group was eating better through their combined efforts. The hoarders, trying to protect what they had, missed opportunities for new thefts. Another layer to the education. Sometimes the greatest strength came from knowing when to share. The seasons changed, but the hunger remained constant. Summer brought different opportunities, fruit trees in the city, gardens to raid, but also different challenges. Food spoiled faster. Hidden caches could rot before consumption. Alexios learned to preserve meat with salt stolen from the kitchens. He discovered which fruits could be dried in the Sunday. He even managed to tame some of the feral cats around the barracks, training them to bring him their catches in exchange for scraps. Every small victory against starvation felt monumental. But the greatest test came during the harvest festival. The city celebrated with feasts while the Agoge continued its iron discipline. The smells of roasting meat and fresh bread drifted over the barracks walls, driving the hungry boys nearly mad. Some tried to sneak into the city celebrations. Most were caught. The festival crowds were alert for Agoge thieves, considering it part of the entertainment. Boys were dragged back in shame, their punishments performed publicly as a reminder. The whip fell harder when the crime embarrassed the institution. Yet some succeeded. They returned with bulging tunics and stories of narrow escapes. These boys became heroes for a night, sharing their spoils and basking in admiration, until morning brought the usual hunger again, and heroism became just another memory. 6 months in, a new terror emerged. The older boys had noticed the younger ones improving skills at theft. Instead of anger, they showed approval. But approval in the Agoge came with expectations. The 7-year-olds were given their first real assignment. "The helots are holding back grain," an 18-year-old named Drakon told them. "The masters want proof. You're small. You can get into places we can't. Find evidence of their hoarding. Bring it back. Succeed. And eat like kings for a week. Fail." He didn't need to finish. Failure meant more than hunger. It meant proving they weren't ready for the responsibilities of Spartan citizenship, that their training was wasted on weak material. The mission required every skill they'd learned: stealth to approach the helot villages, cunning to locate hidden stores, courage to enter enemy territory. The helots weren't truly enemies, but they weren't friends either. These slaves had their own survival to consider. Alexios led a team of 5 boys. They moved at night, barefoot and silent across rocky ground. The helot village slept uneasily. These people knew Spartan boys trained by terrorizing them. Guards were posted, but guards expected older trainees, not 7-year-olds. They slipped through gaps in walls, between sleeping bodies, into storage areas carved from hillsides, and there it was, grain that should have gone to Spartan tables, hidden barrels, secret stores. The helots were surviving the only way they could, just like the boys themselves. For a moment, Alexios hesitated. He understood their hunger. But his own was stronger, and his loyalty had been beaten into shape by months of training. They took samples, enough to prove the hoarding. Then they vanished back into the night. The reward was everything promised: a week of full rations, meat that wasn't spoiled, bread that wasn't stone. The other 7-year-olds looked at them with awe and envy. They had graduated from stealing to survive to stealing for the state. But even full rations couldn't fill the hollow place the hunger had carved. It lived in them now, part of their bones. They would never feel truly satisfied again. The Agoge had taken well-fed children and created beings who could survive on air and cunning. As their first year approached its end, the transformation was complete in one sense. They were no longer the soft boys who had cried for their mothers. They were something harder, something hungrier. But this was just the beginning. Theron gathered them one evening, studying faces that had aged years in months. "You've learned to steal food," he said. "Good. But that was the easy part. Next, you learn to steal something more precious. Information. Secrets. lives. The boys exchanged glances. They thought they had mastered hunger. They thought they understood their training. But Theron's smile promised darker lessons ahead. The Helots think you're just hungry children. He continued. They pity you even as they fear you. That makes them careless. They talk around you. They reveal things. Next year, you don't just steal their grain. He paused, letting the implications sink in. These 7-year-olds who had learned to move like shadows, to think like predators, to survive on nothing. They were being shaped into weapons, and weapons had purposes beyond their own survival. Alexios felt his empty stomach clench, but not from hunger this time, from understanding. They had learned to steal bread from gods and men alike. They had learned that hunger was a teacher, and weakness was death. They had learned to betray their own humanity for an extra mouthful of food. But stealing food was child's play compared to what they'd steal next. And from whom? The bronze blade caught moonlight as 12-year-old Alexios pressed it against his own throat. Not to die. To learn the exact pressure that separated threat from death. His mentor, a 16-year-old named Brasidas, watched with eyes that held no warmth. Too shallow, Brasidas said. A Helot would laugh at that touch, feel where the blood runs. He guided the younger boy's hand, adjusting the angle. There. Now you understand what you're teaching them to fear. This was love in the Agoge. Not gentle, not kind, but absolute in its dedication to creating perfect warriors. Every boy who survived past 10 was paired with an older trainee. The Greeks had a word for it. Erastes and Eromenos, lover and beloved. But in Sparta, love meant something different than in soft Athens. The pairing happened without ceremony. One morning, the younger boys simply found themselves claimed. Some partnerships formed from admiration, others from calculation. The strong chose promising students. The weak took what remained. But once formed, these bonds defined everything. Alexios had caught Brasidas' attention during a night raid. While other boys fled in panic from pursuing guards, Alexios had doubled back, creating confusion that allowed 3 others to escape. Stupid, maybe, but brave. And Brasidas valued courage over sense. Your blood, Brasidas said during their first training session alone, belongs to Sparta, but your pain belongs to me, he demonstrated with casual efficiency, showing pressure points that could paralyze without permanent damage. I'll teach you to give both properly. The relationship went beyond combat training. Brasidas controlled when Alexios ate, slept, spoke. Any failure reflected on both of them. If Alexios performed poorly in drills, Brasidas took lashes alongside him. If Brasidas showed weakness, Alexios paid the price. Their fates intertwined by design. Other pairings took different forms. Procles found himself claimed by Demetrios, a cruel boy who enjoyed the power more than the responsibility. Their training sessions left Procles bruised in ways the regular instructors wouldn't. But he learned too. How to endure. How to hide weakness. How to survive a superior who saw him as entertainment. The sexual component existed but remained unspoken. What happened between mentor and student in private corners concerned no one else. The only rule was discretion. Public displays earned punishment. Privacy earned silence. Some pairs were truly intimate. Others maintained careful distance. Most fell somewhere between. Nicomedes drew the attention of Lysander, the same boy Alexios had once followed to the shrines. Where Brasidas taught through measured brutality, Lysander preferred psychological pressure. He would deprive Nicomedes of food for days, then place a feast just out of reach. The lesson was always control. Master yourself before mastering others. These relationships created networks within networks. Brasidas belonged to a circle of elite older boys preparing for the Krypteia. Through him, Alexios gained access to knowledge usually reserved for 17-year-olds. Secret handholds on the barracks walls. Which instructors had wounds that slowed them, where the Helots posted their smartest watchers. But knowledge came with expectations. During a training exercise, Brasidas ordered Alexios to break another boy's arm. Not in combat, in cold blood. To prove loyalty superseded childhood friendships. The target was Callistos, who had shared stolen food with Alexios just days before. He's weak, Brasidas explained with patient logic. Better he breaks now than fails in battle later. You're doing him kindness. His hand rested on Alexios's shoulder, not threatening, supporting. Unless you're too weak yourself. The question hung between them like a blade. Alexios understood the real test. Not whether he could hurt Callistos, whether he could choose Brasidas over past loyalty, whether the bond between Erastes and Eromenos meant more than childish friendship. Callistos saw it coming in Alexios's eyes. He didn't run or beg. That training had already taken root. He simply nodded, extending his arm, making it easier. Another lesson learned. Sometimes the greatest courage was accepting necessary pain. The crack of breaking bone echoed across the training ground. Callistos screamed once, then clamped his jaw shut. Alexios stepped back, stomach churning but face steady. Brasidas smiled approval. Not at the violence, at the choice. Good, tonight you eat meat. The reward system between pairs operated outside official channels. Mentors who had proven themselves in raids or exercises earned privileges. Extra rations, better weapons, time away from the barracks. They shared these with their chosen boys, creating loyalty through generosity after earning it through pain. That night, Alexios sat beside Brasidas at a fire outside the main complex. The meat was tough goat, but after months of near starvation, it tasted divine. Around them, other mentor pairs gathered in similar circles. The younger boys stayed silent unless addressed. Another rule absorbed through observation. Next month, Brasidas said between bites, I join a Krypteia mission. 3 nights hunting helots who think darkness protects them. He studied Alexios with calculation. You're too young officially, but I could use a scout. The words stopped Alexios mid-chew. The Krypteia was sacred, secret. Only the best students earned selection. For a 12-year-old to participate, even unofficially, was unprecedented. It was also potentially fatal. The helots fought back when cornered. Boys died on these missions. I accept, Alexios said without hesitation. Refusal wasn't really possible, not without destroying everything Brasidas had invested in him. But more than that, he wanted to prove worthy of the honor, of the risk Brasidas was taking by including him. Other pairs had different dynamics. Some mentors ruled through fear alone, beatings for minor infractions, humiliations designed to break spirit, but the successful ones understood balance. Too much brutality created resentment. Too little created weakness. The art was knowing exactly how much pressure would forge without shattering. Procles learned this through contrast. His mentor Demetrios pushed too hard, mistaking cruelty for strength. During sparring, he would continue striking after Procles yielded. During night exercises, he would abandon him in dangerous positions. The other mentors watched but didn't intervene. This, too, was education. The breaking point came during a river crossing exercise. Demetrios ordered Procles to swim the Eurotas during spring flood. The water ran fast and cold, carrying winter snowmelt from the mountains. Even strong swimmers had died attempting it. Procles stood on the bank, calculating odds. Scared, Demetrios taunted. Maybe I chose wrong. Maybe you're too weak for my attention. The other pairs watched from safe positions upstream. Some mentors would have stopped this, recognized the difference between challenging and killing. But Demetrios had something to prove. His own mentor had graduated the previous year, leaving him to establish his own reputation. Procles made his choice, not the river. He turned and struck Demetrios in the throat. A perfect blow, exactly where the older boy had taught him to hit enemies. Demetrios dropped, gasping, and Procles followed with kicks to his ribs, measured, controlled, using every technique he'd learned. When instructors finally intervened, both boys were bloody. But something had shifted. Demetrios looked at his student with new respect and fear. He had created something he couldn't fully control. The best mentors always did. That night, Procles ate at Demetrios's fire for the first time. They didn't speak about the river or the fight, but the dynamic had changed. Respect replaced contempt. Demetrios began teaching real techniques instead of just inflicting pain. The bond formed properly through conflict. Not all pairs found such resolution. Some younger boys couldn't adapt to their mentor's methods. They broke mentally if not physically. These failures reflected on both parties. The younger boy might disappear from training, sent home in disgrace or worse. The mentor faced questions about his judgment in choosing poorly. Alexios watched one such failure unfold over weeks. A boy named Philon had been chosen by an 18-year-old named Agathon, but Philon came from a wealthy family, soft despite the Agoge's efforts. He cried during punishments, flinched from necessary pain, failed to hide his weaknesses. Agathon tried everything: patience, brutality, bribery with extra rations. Nothing transformed Philon into acceptable material. The other mentors began avoiding Agathon, his poor choice marking him as unreliable. In the Agoge, reputation was currency, and his was depleting rapidly. The resolution came during a group exercise. Teams of pairs competed in mock raids, scoring points for stealth and efficiency. Philon panicked during his team's approach, alerting defenders and ruining months of planning. The failure was spectacular and public. That night, Philon's sleeping platform was empty. Agathon trained alone the next morning, his face revealing nothing. No one asked questions. Sometimes boys simply disappeared. Weakness removed itself from the breeding pool one way or another. Brasidas used the example during his next lesson with Alexios. They practiced holds designed to render enemies unconscious without killing. Each technique required perfect control. Too little pressure accomplished nothing. Too much caused permanent damage. Agathon waited too long. Brasidas explained while demonstrating a blood choke. Sentiment clouded his judgment. When weakness shows, you cut it out immediately. Like infection, delay only spreads the disease. His arm tightened around Alexios's throat. The world grayed at the edges before he released. Alexios gasped, memorizing the sensation. How quickly strength left the body. How easily life became death. These lessons went beyond combat technique. "Your turn," Brasidas said. "Make me sleep." Alexios applied the hold as taught. His smaller arm struggled to find proper position on Brasidas's thicker neck. The older boy didn't make it easy, shifting slightly to break leverage. But eventually Alexios found the angle. Pressure on the carotid arteries, steady increase. Brasidas's hand tapped twice, the signal to release. But his eyes said something else. A test within the test. How far would Alexios go on implied permission? How much did he trust their bond? 3 seconds passed. 4. Brasidas's face darkened. His hand moved to tap again, more urgently. At 5 seconds, Alexios released. His mentor collapsed forward, catching himself on his hands. When he looked up, his expression mixed pride with something darker. "Good," he said once breath returned. "You understood. Another second, and I would have slept. 2 more, and damage begins. You found the edge." He rubbed his throat. Most are too frightened to approach it, or too eager and go beyond. Balance in all things. This was the essential education. Not just techniques but judgment. When to press, when to release, when mercy was strength, when it was weakness. The mentor relationship provided a safe space to explore these boundaries. Safe being relative in the Agoge. As months passed, the bonds deepened or shattered completely. Successful pairs moved like single organisms during exercises. The younger boy anticipated his mentor's needs. The older provided guidance through gesture and example more than words. They became extensions of each other's will. Failed pairings created different lessons. Boys learned to survive hostile attention, to find strength despite active opposition. Some emerged harder for the experience. Others simply emerged no more. The system selected for adaptability above all else. Alexios's bond with Brasidas evolved into something complex. Not quite father and son, not quite lovers, something uniquely Spartan. Brasidas pushed him to extremes, but never beyond breaking. In return, Alexios gave absolute loyalty and trust. They would die for each other without hesitation. During one-night exercise, they demonstrated this bond perfectly. The task required pairs to navigate the mountain paths blindfolded. The younger boy gave directions. The older followed without question. One misstep meant falling into ravines that had claimed previous students. 3 steps forward, Alexios whispered. Now left. Feel for the oak root. Brasidas moved without hesitation, his life literally in the hands of a 12-year-old boy. Other pairs struggled with trust. Mentors questioned directions. Younger boys gave unclear guidance. Several pairs had to be rescued from ledges where doubt had led them. But Alexios and Brasidas moved like dancers, every instruction precise, every movement confident. They completed the course faster than pairs where both could see. The exercise wasn't about navigation. It was about the absolute faith required between hoplites holding a phalanx line. That night, Brasidas shared wine stolen from the instructor's stores. Just a sip for Alexios, enough to warm his throat. They sat in comfortable silence, the bond between them needing no words. This was what the pairing system created at its best. Trust that transcended normal human connections. But the system had darker purposes too. These intimate bonds would be tested and weaponized. The Agoge didn't create connections for their own sake. Everything served the state's needs. Love was just another tool to forge perfect warriors. The first real test came without warning, when they discovered exactly what loyalty truly cost. December winds howled through the barracks, carrying ice from Mount Taygetos. Alexios stood with 40 other 12-year-olds in the pre-dawn darkness, naked except for the single rough cloak each boy clutched. Their breath formed clouds that crystallized and fell like snow. The cold had weight here, pressing against exposed skin with fingers that found every vulnerability. The paidonomos walked among them, fully armored against the winter bite. His bronze gleamed with frost as he stopped before a shivering boy whose lips had turned blue. The man's scarred face showed neither sympathy nor cruelty as he ripped the cloak away. The boy's knees buckled, but he remained standing through will alone. "Cold is an enemy," the paidonomos announced, voice cutting through chattering teeth. "You can fight it like fools, wasting energy on shivers and complaints." He held up the stolen cloak. "Or you can make it serve you." He dropped the cloak in the mud. No one moved to retrieve it. That lesson had been learned through blood months ago. What fell stayed fallen until permission came. The naked boy stood straighter, forcing his muscles to stop shaking through pure determination. "Run," the paidonomos commanded. They ran. Bare feet slapped frozen earth as they circled the compound. The movement brought warmth, but at a price. Sweat began to form, and in this cold, sweat meant death. The smart ones found the balance, moving just fast enough to generate heat without perspiration. Others pushed too hard and would pay when they stopped. After 20 circuits, they halted. Those who had sweated now understood their error as wind turned moisture to ice on their skin. Alexios had learned this lesson the previous winter, watching an older boy collapse from hypothermia after overexertion. The body's warmth was finite currency in winter. Spend it wisely or freeze. Form phalanx, came the next order. They pressed together in battle formation, skin against skin. What seemed shameful in summer became survival in winter. Shared body heat, distributed equally among the group. The boys on the outside rotated inward at regular intervals. No command needed. They moved like a single organism with 40 hearts. This was December's gift to Sparta. While Persian soldiers huddled around fires, Spartan boys learned to find warmth in brotherhood and movement. The human body could endure far more than soft minds believed. Cold was just another trainer, teaching lessons about conservation and cooperation. As sunrise approached, they moved to combat drills. Fighting nude in winter presented unique challenges. Muscles responded slowly. Grip strength vanished as fingers numbed. The ground became an enemy. Frozen mud, treacherous under bare feet. Every technique practiced in warmth had to be relearned for these conditions. Brasidas appeared at the edge of the training ground, watching his protege with critical eyes. Alexios felt the scrutiny and pushed harder, executing a takedown on his opponent despite numb hands that barely felt the hold. The other boy hit frozen earth with a crack that might have been ice or bone. "Pathetic," Brasidas called out, loud enough for all to hear. "In real combat you'd both be dead. Cold has made you slow as helots." The insult stung worse than winter wind. Alexios rolled to his feet, helping his opponent rise. They squared off again, this time forgetting the cold entirely. Pride burned hotter than any fire. Their movements sharpened, driven by shame and determination to prove their mentor wrong. The morning progressed through stages of calculated misery. Weapons drill with bronze that stuck to sweating palms, swimming in the Eurotas, where ice chunks floated like tiny daggers. Always the same principle. What nearly killed you in training merely inconvenienced you in battle. By midday, 3 boys had been dragged unconscious to the medical quarters. The instructors noted their names without comment. Weakness revealed itself in many forms. Some boys broke from pain, others from hunger. These fell to nature's most basic test. The cold didn't care about your potential or your bloodline. During the brief meal break, they huddled in the mess hall. Cloaks finally returned. The black broth, usually reviled, became precious for its warmth. Alexios cupped his bowl like treasure, feeling heat seep into frozen fingers. Around him, boys did the same, savoring temperature more than taste. "Tonight we train until midnight," Theron informed his group between mouthfuls. Full moon. Perfect conditions for mountain work. No one groaned. They had learned that complaints brought worse than whatever they protested. But Alexios saw the fear in younger boys' eyes. Night training in summer was harsh enough. Winter nights on Taygetos killed the careless and unlucky with equal enthusiasm. The afternoon brought a different torture. Dance practice, the warrior's pirish. What looked graceful in performance became agony when muscles barely functioned. They moved through the patterns, bronze armor adding weight to already exhausted limbs. Each leap and spin fought against bodies that wanted only to curl up and preserve warmth. "Dance is combat without blood," the instructor barked, striking laggards with his staff. "Your enemies won't wait for summer to attack. Neither will you wait for comfort to defend." They danced until sweat ran despite the cold. Then came the true punishment, standing perfectly still as moisture froze on overheated skin. This was the deadliest moment, when the body's natural cooling mechanisms became weapons turned inward. Several boys began the telltale shaking that preceded collapse. "Lock shields," someone called out. Not an instructor, Alexios. He had seen the danger and acted without thinking. They formed up, pressing together again. Those shaking worst went to the center, surrounded by whatever warmth their brothers could provide. The instructors watched without interfering. This too was part of the lesson. Individual strength meant nothing if the group failed. They stood in formation until the danger passed. Then back to drills, because comfort was always temporary in the Agoge. As afternoon wore toward evening, the cold deepened. Breath didn't just mist now, but formed ice crystals that fell like tiny knives. The mountain wind picked up, carrying promises of worse to come. For the javelin training, their throws fell short by meters. Frozen muscles couldn't generate full power. The instructors adjusted, teaching compensation techniques, how to account for reduced strength, how to pick targets within diminished range, how to kill efficiently even when everything worked against you. One boy, Leontis, made the mistake of complaining about numb fingers after a particularly poor throw. The instructor's response was swift. Leontis found himself buried to his neck in a snowbank, only his head exposed. He would remain there through the rest of practice, learning the difference between inconvenience and actual suffering. The others continued training around their buried comrade. This was Sparta. Sympathy was weakness. They had all been Leontis at some point, paying for moments of human frailty. They would all be him again before their training ended. The only variable was when and how severely. As darkness fell, they prepared for the mountain exercise. Extra cloaks were forbidden, only what they wore every day, because enemies didn't announce winter raids in advance. They formed into small groups, each with specific objectives to achieve before midnight: reach certain peaks, retrieve hidden markers, evade the older boys who would hunt them. Alexios led his squad of 5 into the foothills as full darkness arrived. The moon lit their way, turning the frozen landscape into something alien. Every shadow could hide danger. Every ice patch could send them tumbling into ravines. They moved carefully but quickly, knowing that speed generated heat while caution preserved energy. They had made it halfway to their objective when the first scream echoed across the mountainside. Not pain, terror. Someone had fallen, and fallen far. The sound cut off abruptly, leaving silence more ominous than any cry. One fewer competitor, One more reminder that these exercises had permanent consequences. The marker they sought was supposed to be near a distinctive rock formation, but in winter, with snow changing the landscape's shape, nothing looked quite right. They searched with increasing desperation as cold crept through their cloaks. Time was an enemy here. Stay still too long and freeze. Move too much and exhaust precious energy. There, Proclus whispered, pointing to a shadow that might be their target. They approached carefully. The older boys loved ambushes near objectives, knowing younger trainees would focus on goals rather than threats. But the clearing remained empty as they retrieved their marker, a small bronze disc that proved they had reached this point. The return journey should have been easier. Downhill, familiar territory, but exhaustion had set in, and exhaustion in winter meant death. Two of their group began stumbling, their coordination failing as core temperature dropped. Alexios recognized the signs from previous training. "Form up," he ordered. "We carry them." They fashioned a support system, stronger boys taking weight from weaker ones. It slowed them dramatically. Other groups passed, some jeering at their weakness, but Alexios had learned from Brasidas. Sometimes the harder choice was the right choice. Abandoning companions might win the exercise but would lose something more valuable. They made it back, just as the instructors were preparing search parties for the slowest groups. Their time was poor, their condition worse, but they had all returned, and the marker proved they had completed the objective. The instructor took note without comment, but Alexios caught something in his eyes. Not approval exactly, but acknowledgement. Inside the barracks, they found controlled chaos. Boys treating frostbite, others vomiting from exhaustion. The medical area overflowed with casualties from the night exercise. Winter training claimed its toll in flesh as surely as any battle. These were the acceptable losses that created unbreakable survivors. They collapsed on their platforms without even removing wet cloaks. Tomorrow would bring the same trials. And the day after. All winter long, until spring seemed like a myth and warmth became a half-remembered dream. This was how Sparta created warriors who could march through blizzards and fight in conditions that sent enemies fleeing for shelter. But the cold was merely preparation. Physical suffering could be endured through strength and will. What came next required different fortitude entirely. As Alexios drifted toward unconsciousness, Brasidas appeared at his platform. His mentor's face was grave in the lamplight. "Tomorrow," Brasidas said quietly, "you learn why we train in winter. The Krypteia doesn't wait for comfortable weather, and neither do helots who think darkness and cold will protect them from Spartan justice." He left without elaborating, but his words lodged like ice splinters in Alexios's mind. All this suffering, all this conditioning against cold and exhaustion, had a purpose beyond mere endurance. They were being prepared to hunt human prey in conditions that would horrify normal men. The wind howled outside, promising another frozen dawn. Around him, boys coughed and shivered in fitful sleep. Some would wake with pneumonia, others with frostbite that would cost fingers or toes. But those who survived would carry winter in their bones forever. A cold that no enemy's fire could warm, a strength forged in ice and starlight, and the frozen breath of dying friends. This was December in the Agoge, but physical suffering was just preparation for the real test, learning to embrace pain itself. The bronze blade pressed against skin until a thin line of red appeared. Alexios watched his own blood bead along the metal edge, counting heartbeats between the cut and the pain. 3, 4, 5. There. The sensation arrived, sharp and clean, exactly as Brasidas had predicted. "Deeper next time," Brasidas instructed. His voice carried no emotion as he guided Alexios's hand to create another incision on his forearm. "Pain has patterns. Learn them, master them, then teach others to fear what you no longer feel." Around them in the torchlit courtyard, 50 boys aged 12 to 15 practiced similar exercises. The whisper of blades on flesh mixed with controlled breathing. No cries, no flinches. Just methodical self-destruction under their mentors' watchful eyes. The youngest struggled to break their own skin, hands trembling from instinct rather than fear. This was the diamastagosis preparation, training for the whipping festival where boys would compete to endure the most lashes without sound. Victory brought honor. Defeat brought shame. But first they had to understand pain as intimately as they understood hunger. "Your turn," Alexios said, offering the blade to a younger boy named Stefanos. The 10-year-old's eyes went wide, but he took the bronze without hesitation. The cut he made was barely visible, more scratch than wound. Fear still ruled his muscles. Brasidas noticed immediately. "Pathetic. At this rate, you'll scream on the first lash." He took Stefanos's hand, positioning the blade properly. "Cut like you mean it. Pain avoided in training becomes death in battle." The correction was swift and efficient. Stefanos gasped as real blood finally flowed, but managed to swallow any louder reaction. Progress. Small, but measurable. Every boy started here, learning to overcome the body's natural preservation instincts one careful cut at a time. The exercises escalated gradually. First cuts, then burns from heated bronze. Joints bent just past comfort. Pressure points that sent lightning through nerves. Each sensation catalogued and controlled. The body contained thousands of pain responses. Spartans learned them all. Formation for the stones. An instructor called out. The boys arranged themselves in lines, placing their hands flat on wooden blocks. Above each hand, an older trainee held a rounded stone, heavy enough to break bones if dropped from height. This exercise tested trust as much as endurance. The stones came down slowly, controlled descents that let victims track their approaching agony. Knuckles compressed, joints ground together. The pressure built until hands felt ready to shatter. Some boys yanked away at the last moment, earning derision and extra repetitions. Others endured until told to stop. Alexios focused on his breathing as granite crushed his fingers. The pain was exquisite, each small bone announcing its distress in sharp bursts. Beside him, another boy's hand actually did break, metacarpals snapping with sounds like twigs. The boy smiled through tears that came from reflex, not emotion. "Beautiful," the instructor noted, examining the broken hand with professional interest. "Clean fractures. They'll heal stronger." He sent the boy to set the bones himself, another lesson in self-sufficiency. Who else wants stronger hands? 3 volunteers stepped forward. The cracking sounds echoed across the courtyard as they deliberately fractured their own bones under supervision. Calculated damage that would heal into something harder. The mathematics of improvement through destruction governed everything here. The night progression followed ancient patterns. After bones came muscles, stretched past tearing points. After muscles came breathing exercises while submerged in ice water. The body's panic responses had to be conquered systematically. Each boy found different breaking points. Alexios excelled at cutting and burning, but struggled with suffocation. The moment cloth covered his mouth and nose, primitive terror flooded his system. Brasidas noticed, because Brasidas noticed everything. Instead of mockery, he provided targeted instruction. "The fear lives in your chest, not your lungs," Brasidas explained while holding the wet cloth ready. "You have minutes of air. The panic kills in seconds. Choose which one wins." The cloth descended again. This time Alexios counted heartbeats instead of fighting. 20, 30, 40. His vision grayed at the edges, but the panic retreated to manageable levels. When Brasidas removed the cloth, pride flickered in his mentor's eyes. Other boys found different demons. Procles couldn't tolerate pressure on his throat without violent reaction. Nicomedes broke at the sight of his own blood. Stefanos still flinched from every impact. But progress was measurable. What triggered? Screams one week, earned mere grimaces the next. The formal competitions added public pressure to private preparation. Every few nights, boys would demonstrate their pain tolerance before the entire barracks. Points awarded for creativity, duration, and above all, silence. These exhibitions drove innovation in suffering. One 14-year-old named Kairos became legendary for his demonstrations. He would drive bronze needles through his cheeks, thread leather cords through the holes, then allow younger boys to pull him around the courtyard like a dog, all while maintaining perfect military posture and serene expression. "Theatre," Brasidas commented after one such display, but with grudging respect. Pain as performance rather than true mastery. Still, the crowds love spectacle. The crowds included visiting dignitaries, checking on their sons' progress. Mothers weren't permitted, but fathers could observe from designated areas, watching their heirs bleed and burn with pride rather than horror. This too was Spartan conditioning, extended to the entire society. During one exhibition, a visiting Persian ambassador watched in horrified fascination as boys competed to hold burning coals longest. His translator struggled to explain the purpose. Why would warriors train to withstand tortures they could simply avoid? The question revealed everything about the difference between their cultures. We train for the worst, the paidonomos explained with patience reserved for slow foreigners. Your soldiers flee when wounded because pain surprises them. Ours fight harder because pain is an old friend. The ambassador left early when the coal-holding evolved into brands pressed against flesh. Several boys managed to smell their own skin cooking without reaction. The Spartan fathers applauded technique and duration. Art and agony intertwined in ways outsiders couldn't comprehend. But public exhibitions were theatre compared to private ordeals. These happened without witness or glory, testing pure will against flesh's limits. Alexios endured his worst during a winter night when infection set into one of his training cuts. The wound festered, spreading red tendrils up his arm. Fever came with it, cooking his brain while chills racked his body. Easy enough to seek the healers, but that would mean admitting weakness, admitting the infection had won. Instead, he treated himself, heated his own blade over a lamp flame, pressed glowing bronze against infected flesh to burn out corruption. The smell filled his nostrils as healthy skin charred alongside diseased. His free hand covered his mouth, muffling screams that wanted to escape. Brasidas found him afterward, arm wrapped in stolen linen, shaking from fever and self-inflicted trauma. His mentor studied the crude cauterization with critical eye. Then, without word, he provided proper supplies. Clean bandages, healing salve, acknowledgement without approval. Brave but stupid, Brasidas finally said. Infection kills more warriors than Persian spears. Next time kill it before it spreads. He paused at the doorway. Still, you chose the harder path. That matters. Recovery took weeks. The scarring was extensive, white rivers of destroyed tissue running up Alexios's forearm. But scars told stories in Sparta. His spoke of private victory over weakness. Other boys asked how he'd earned such marks. He never told them. The formal diamastigosis approached like a storm system. Boys increased their preparation intensity. Where once they managed 20 lashes in practice, now they endured 40, 50. The whips grew heavier, the strikes more precise. Instructors aimed for maximum pain with minimum permanent damage. Alexios learned to enter a trance state during beatings. His consciousness floated somewhere above his body, observing the blood and impact with detached interest. Time became elastic. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours compressed into heartbeats. The whip became rhythm, almost musical. Others developed different coping mechanisms. Procles recited epic poetry in his mind, matching cadence to lash patterns. Nicomedes focused on hatred, using rage to transmute pain into fuel. Each boy found his own path through agony's landscape. The night before the festival, Brasidas shared wine and wisdom in equal measure. They sat on the barracks roof, watching stars wheel overhead. Below them, younger boys practiced final preparations. The sound of leather on flesh provided steady percussion. Tomorrow isn't about winning, Brasidas said, surprising Alexios. It's about understanding. Every lash you take without breaking proves something. Not to the crowd, not to the gods, to yourself. He drank deeply before continuing. I took 63 lashes my year. Blood ran to my ankles. I pissed myself after 40 but kept standing. Nobody noticed in all the red. He smiled at the memory. Best moment of my life until then. Why? Alexios had to ask. What made it worth that? Because I met myself truly. No pretense, no shields. Just me and pain having an honest conversation. Brasidas passed the wine. Most men die without that meeting. Tomorrow you get yours. They drank in companionable silence while below them flesh met leather in endless repetition. Tomorrow would bring the real test, not practice wounds in controlled conditions, public agony with the city watching. Some would transcend, others would break. All would learn exactly who they really were. The morning arrived with ceremony and dread mixing in equal parts. But first came one final preparation. The altar of Artemis Orthia demanded blood, and Sparta always paid its debts. The selection happened at midnight during their 14th winter. No warning, just rough hands shaking them awake and hooded figures standing between the platforms. Alexios counted 6 intruders before someone pressed cloth against his face. The smell hit first, something sweet and chemical that made the world tilt sideways. Fighting was useless. These weren't enemies but senior students conducting the harvest. Every year the Krypteia needed fresh recruits. The secret police of Sparta required special qualities beyond normal warrior training. Cunning over strength, silence over glory, the ability to kill without hesitation or remorse. When consciousness returned, Alexios found himself in an underground chamber lit by oil lamps. Stone walls sweated moisture in the flickering light. 20 boys sat in a rough circle, all around his age, all chosen for qualities the hooded figures had observed over years. Some nursed bruised skulls from resisting too effectively. The hoods came off their captors. Alexios recognized most as recent graduates, 18 and 19-year-olds who had earned their citizenship through blood. They moved differently than regular warriors, quieter, more aware of shadows and corners. These were the ones who hunted in darkness. Their leader stepped forward, a scarred youth named Autolycos, whose reputation preceded him. During his final trial, he had infiltrated a helot settlement and eliminated 6 conspirators without waking their families sleeping in adjacent rooms. The precision of those kills had become legend among students. Now he would teach others his methods. Forget everything the Paidonamos taught you about honor in combat, Autolycos began without preamble. His voice barely rose above whisper, yet carried perfectly in the stone chamber. The Krypteia doesn't fight, we execute. We terrorize. We maintain order through selective horror. He produced a blade unlike any training weapon. Thin as a reed, double-edged, designed for insertion rather than slashing. The metal had been blackened with soot until it seemed to absorb light. Several boys leaned forward, recognizing the tool's terrible purpose. Your targets won't be Persian warriors seeking glorious battle. They'll be helot slaves who forget their place, women who birth too many strong sons, old men who whisper rebellion by firelight. Autolycos tested the blade's point against his thumb. Killing them requires different skills than you've learned. The first lesson began immediately. They paired off to practice strikes that would silence rather than simply wound. The throat contained many targets: windpipe for suffocation, arteries for quick bleeding, vocal cords to prevent screams. Each required different angles and depths. Precision mattered more than power. Alexios found himself partnered with Dionysios, a boy known for exceptional stealth during night exercises. They took turns tracing blade paths on each other's necks, memorizing the feel of cartilage and pulse points through skin. The intimacy of it was disturbing, looking into someone's eyes while planning their quietest death. No, Autolycos corrected Alexios's grip. You're still thinking like a hoplite. Big movements, honorable stance. He adjusted the hand position. Think like a shadow. Economy of motion. Your target should be dead before they know you exist. They moved to garroting techniques next. Leather cords and bronze wires became instruments of silent execution. The key was positioning, approaching from behind, loop over the head, knee in the back for leverage. Done properly, unconsciousness came in seconds, death shortly after. One boy named Theromenes struggled with the concept. His hands shook as he practiced the motions. During regular combat training, he excelled through aggression and strength, but this cold precision went against every instinct. Autolycos noticed immediately. Stand up, Theromenes. The command cut through whispered practice. Tell us why you shake. The boy straightened, jaw clenched. This feels wrong. Attacking from behind, killing the defenseless. Where's the honor? Several students shifted uncomfortably. They all felt it to some degree. Years of training had emphasized facing enemies directly. The phalanx was built on mutual courage. This shadow work seemed to violate fundamental principles. Autolycos smiled without warmth. Honor, a luxury for those who fight equals. He moved behind Theramenes faster than thought, bronze wire suddenly around the boy's throat. The Helots outnumber us 20-1. Honor would see every Spartan throat cut in their sleep. He released Theramenes, who gasped and rubbed his neck. We are not honorable. We are necessary. The Krypteia keeps 300,000 slaves from overwhelming 30,000 citizens. Simple mathematics written in selective blood. The lesson continued, but with new understanding. This wasn't corruption of their warrior code, but extension of it. Protection, through different means. Where the hoplites were Sparta's sword, the Krypteia served as its poisoned blade. Both necessary, neither complete alone. They spent hours on approach techniques. Moving through darkness required abandoning normal walking patterns, weight distributed differently, breathing controlled to silence. Every piece of equipment muffled or removed entirely. By dawn, they could cross the chamber without disturbing the sand scattered to reveal footprints. Tomorrow night, first practical exercise, Autolycos announced as grey light filtered through ventilation gaps. The Helot village of Therapne reports unusual gatherings. Possible conspiracy. We observe first. Act if necessary. The prospect sent electricity through exhausted bodies. Real targets, real consequences. Everything until now had been theory and practice. Tomorrow would baptize them in conspiracy's blood. Some faces showed eagerness. Others carefully masked dread. Back in regular barracks, they weren't permitted to speak of their selection. The Krypteia remained officially secret despite everyone knowing it existed. They attended normal training, but everything felt different now. When practicing phalanx drills, Alexios found himself noting how exposed necks were above shield rims. Brasidas noticed his distraction during afternoon weapons practice. His mentor said nothing directly, but understanding flickered in his eyes. He had probably served his own Krypteia term. Most elite students did. Another bond between them that would never be discussed. That evening, they prepared differently than for normal exercises. No bronze armor, no red cloaks. Instead, dark tunics that blended with shadows, soft leather shoes that muffled footsteps, faces darkened with ash until only eyes remained visible. The transformation from warriors to wraiths was complete. They met Autolycos at the city's edge as full darkness fell. No moon tonight, the carefully chosen for maximum concealment. He inspected each boy's preparation, adjusting equipment and darkening exposed skin. Satisfied, he led them into the hills. The march to Therapne took 2 hours of careful movement. No talking, no unnecessary sounds. When someone stepped on a dry branch, the crack seemed loud as thunder. They all froze, learning how darkness amplified every mistake. In daylight, such sounds vanished. At night, they could mean discovery. The Helot village appeared as dim firelights in the valley below. Most dwellings were dark, their occupants asleep after hard labor in Spartan fields. But one building showed activity, shadows moving past windows, multiple voices carrying on still air, more people than should gather at this hour. Autolycos deployed them in a loose circle around the building. Each pair found concealment and settled to observe. This was the hardest part, remaining motionless for hours. Muscles cramped. Insects crawled across faces that couldn't move to brush them away. Discipline meant enduring minor torments silently. Alexios and Dionysios positioned themselves near a window gap. Inside, they counted 12 Helot men ranging from teenagers to grey beards. The conversation was animated but too low to understand. One man gestured repeatedly at something that looked like a map. Another sharpened farm tools with more care than agriculture required. Time crawled. Alexios's legs went numb from maintaining his crouch. Beside him, Dionysios breathed so quietly he might have been stone. This was what the Krypteia did most often. Watched, waited, gathered intelligence that prevented rebellions before they started. Near dawn, the gathering broke up. The Helots departed in different directions, trying to appear casual. But one detail stood out. Several touched their left shoulders as they parted. A sign, a recognition between conspirators. Small but damning in its consistency. They regrouped with Autolycos in a dry riverbed as sunrise approached. Each pair reported observations. The touching gesture appeared in every account. Combined with the map and weapon maintenance, the evidence pointed toward planned violence. The question became what to do about it. 3 options, Autolycos explained with the detachment of experience. Report to the E4s and let official forces handle it. Kill the leaders tonight as warning. Or eliminate them all and end the threat completely. He studied the young faces around him. What would you choose? The debate was quiet, but intense. Some argued for official channels. Others wanted immediate action. Theramenes, surprisingly, advocated for total elimination. His earlier hesitation had transformed into hard pragmatism. The mathematics Autolycos mentioned had taken root. We report, Autolycos decided, ending discussion. But we also prepare. Tomorrow night we return. If the F4s want action, we provide it. If not, we continue watching. The march back tested exhaustion against training. They had been awake over 24 hours, most spent in tense observation, but Krypteia operations often lasted days. This was merely introduction to the endurance required. Several boys stumbled but were caught by partners before they fell. In the barracks, they dispersed to normal routines. No acknowledgement of the night's activities. Alexios collapsed on his platform for 2 hours of sleep before morning horn. His dreams were dark, filled with shadows that moved like men, and men who dissolved like shadows. Training that day was brutal. The instructors seemed to know which boys had been out all night and pushed them harder, perhaps testing whether they could maintain cover under exhaustion, perhaps simply enjoying their suffering. Motivation mattered less than survival. During the midday meal, a senior student approached their table. He said nothing, merely placed a small bronze token beside Alexios's bowl. The message was clear. Report to the underground chamber after evening formation. The F4s had made their decision. The rest of the day passed in strange anticipation. Regular training felt hollow compared to what waited in darkness. Alexios caught himself studying other students' necks during wrestling practice, calculating angles, estimating resistance. The knowledge Autolycos had planted was growing roots. Evening brought 20 boys back to the stone chamber. Autolycos waited with 2 other Krypteia veterans. Their faces promised that tonight's lesson would advance beyond observation. On the table lay weapons, not practice tools but instruments designed for quiet death. The F4s have spoken, Autolycos announced. The conspiracy in Therapna ends tonight. 3 leaders identified through your reconnaissance. They die as examples. The others receive warnings that will echo through every Helot dwelling. He gestured to the weapons. Choose your tools. Remember, silence matters more than speed. Fear matters more than both. The moon vanished behind clouds as 20 young men crept through mountain passes. Their bare feet found purchase on rocks that would have crippled normal travelers. No sound marked their passage except the whisper of wind through pine needles. 20 years of training had prepared them for this moment. Tonight they would prove themselves worthy of Spartan citizenship or die in the attempt. Alexios moved at the front of his group, every sense straining for danger. The test parameters were simple enough. Survive 1 month in the wilderness. No weapons, no supplies, no contact with civilization. The mountains would provide everything or nothing. Those who returned would join the ranks of full citizens. Those who didn't would feed the wolves. Behind him, Procles matched his pace perfectly. They had trained together since age 7, survived the Agoge's worst tortures side by side. Now at 20, their bodies were weapons forged in 13 years of systematic brutality. Muscle, corded over frames stripped of every ounce of unnecessary flesh. Scars told stories across their backs and arms. Their eyes held the particular emptiness that came from seeing too much too young. The group split at a predetermined point. No words exchanged. Communication through gesture had become second nature years ago. 5 separate paths into the wilderness. 5 chances for survival. The instructors had been clear about one rule above all others. Work together and die together. This test measured individual worth. Spartan citizens stood alone before they stood in phalanx. Alexios chose his direction based on water sounds carried on the night breeze. Survival started with the basics. water, shelter, food. In that order. Everything else was luxury. The spring rains had been generous this year. Streams would run strong through the mountain valleys. He angled toward the sound, bare feet silent on pine needles. The darkness was absolute under the forest canopy. City dwellers would have been blind here, but the Agoge had taken boys into these mountains countless times. Night exercises, hunting parties, punishment marches. Alexios knew this terrain in his bones. Every ravine that could break an ankle, every cliff that promised a quick death, every cave that might offer shelter or harbor bears. He found the stream by sound rather than sight. The water ran cold and fast, snow melt from the peaks mixing with recent rain. Alexios drank deeply, then began following it upstream. Predators hunted near water, but so did prey. The knife edge between danger and opportunity defined everything in these mountains. Dawn was still hours away when he found what he needed. A rocky overhang created a natural shelter where the stream curved, defensible, hidden, close to water, but high enough to avoid flash floods. He gathered pine boughs in darkness, creating a bed that would insulate him from the ground. Body heat was precious currency in mountain nights. Sleep came in fragments. Every sound might herald danger. Mountain cats prowled these slopes. Bears emerged from winter dens hungry and aggressive. Even other candidates might become threats if desperation grew strong enough. The instructors hadn't forbidden violence between them. They hadn't forbidden anything except leaving the mountains. True dawn revealed his surroundings in stark detail. The shelter was better than he'd hoped. The overhang extended deep enough to protect from rain. The stream below teemed with small fish. Pine forests stretched in every direction, promising materials for tools and traps. But first came the morning's primary task, checking for other human presence. Alexios climbed the nearest tall pine with practiced ease. From its crown he could see for miles. Smoke from a distant fire marked where another candidate had been less careful. The fool had announced his position to every predator in the area, both four-legged and two-legged. That fire would die before nightfall, one way or another. He memorized the landscape visible from his perch. Ridgelines, valley mouths, water sources, potential hunting grounds. Then descended to begin the real work. Survival required tools. Tools required materials. Materials required knowledge, accumulated through 13 years of preparation. The first tool was simple, a digging stick hardened in coals from a carefully concealed fire. With it, he excavated edible roots the instructors had shown them years ago. Bitter, stringy, but calories that would keep him moving. Next came cordage twisted from inner bark, then stone flakes knocked from river rocks, each item crude but functional. By midday, he had fishing lines in the water and snares on game trails. The waiting began. Patience was another lesson beaten into them through years of night watches. Stillness that let prey forget danger existed. Alexios settled into the hunter's trance, aware of everything while appearing dead to the world. The first fish took the bait as afternoon shadows lengthened. Small, bony, but protein was protein. He ate it raw, organs and all. Cooking meant fire. Fire meant smoke. Smoke meant detection. The math was simple. Stay hidden. Stay alive. Let others make mistakes that would thin the competition. Night brought new challenges. The temperature plummeted as darkness fell. Without fire, without proper clothing, hypothermia became a real threat. Alexios had prepared for this. Pine boughs packed around his body. A shelter made smaller to trap heat. Movement to keep blood flowing when cold grew too intense. Sometime near midnight, a scream echoed across the mountains. Human, male, cut short in a way that suggested violence rather than accident. One fewer competitor. Or perhaps a helot who had chosen the wrong night to be in the wrong place. The mountains held many secrets. Not all of them involved the citizenship trials. Morning came slowly. Alexios checked his snares to find one had caught a rabbit. The animal was thin from winter but represented several days of careful eating. He skinned it with stone tools, saving the hide. Everything had use here. Meat for strength, bones for hooks, sinew for stronger cordage, hide for carrying water. 3 days passed in similar patterns. Forage, hunt, hide, sleep with one eye open. His body adjusted to the reduced calories, metabolism slowing, senses sharpening. The constant edge of hunger was an old friend by now. It kept him focused. Complacent predators didn't survive. Neither did complacent prey. On the fourth night, Alexios woke to footsteps outside his shelter. Human, moving carefully but not carefully enough. He lay still, hand closing on a shaped stone that served as his primary weapon. The steps paused directly outside. Someone had found his hiding place. The mathematics of confrontation ran through his mind. Fight and risk injury that would mean death out here. Hide and hope they passed. The footsteps moved on. Alexios released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. But the encounter changed everything. Someone knew his location now. Time to relocate. He gathered his few possessions and melted into the forest. Behind him, the shelter that had served well became just another shadow among shadows. The new camp was higher, harder to reach, more exposed to weather but also to approaching threats. Alexios spent a full day creating concealed approaches and escape routes. Paranoia was just another survival tool. The mountains didn't care about fair fights. Neither did he. A week in, the real hunger began. His snares had been less successful at the new location. Fish grew wary of his lines. Edible plants became harder to find as he exhausted nearby sources. This was the test within the test. When easy food disappeared, would he take greater risks or accept slow starvation? The answer came when he spotted deer tracks leading to a watering hole. Persistence hunting. The oldest human technique. No Spartan weapons needed. Just endurance. Just will. Alexios began the steady pace that would eventually run any animal to exhaustion. Hours passed. The deer fled. He followed. It rested. He didn't. By afternoon, the animal was stumbling. Foam marked its muzzle. Its sides heaved with desperate breathing. Alexios closed the distance step by measured step. When it finally collapsed, he was there. A stone to the skull ended its suffering. Meat for a week if he was careful. Victory earned through patience and pain. Butchering with stone tools took hours. Every cut had to be precise. Waste nothing. He worked systematically, separating meat into portions that would dry properly. The hide would become a water carrier. Bones would be cracked for marrow. Even the hooves had uses. This was wealth in the wilderness. But wealth attracted attention. The smell of blood carried far. By nightfall, Alexios had visitors. Not human. A pair of mountain cats circled his camp, drawn by the scent of fresh meat. He had expected this, planned for it. The cats wanted easy meals. He would teach them the price of Spartan property. The first cat tested his defenses near midnight. It crept close to where meat hung drying. Alexios waited until it committed to the approach. Then he struck. The thrown stone caught it behind the ear. Not enough to kill, enough to hurt. The cat fled with a yowl that echoed off mountain walls. Its partner proved more cautious. It circled wider, waited longer. But hunger eventually overcame wisdom. When it finally approached, Alexios was ready with a different lesson. The cordage snare closed on its front paw. The cat's panicked thrashing only tightened the trap. By dawn, he had added cat meat to his stores, and a reputation among the local predators. 2 weeks passed, then 3. His body had adapted completely to wilderness life. He moved differently now, thought differently. The abstract concept of citizenship seemed less important than the immediate reality of survival. This was freedom in its purest form. No instructors, no schedules, no expectations, except those he set himself. But isolation brought its own challenges. Without human contact, the mind began playing tricks. Shadows became enemies. Wind carried voices that weren't there. One night he spent hours convinced Brasidas was calling his name. Only dawn revealed the truth. An owl. Nothing more. The mountains tested sanity as surely as they tested flesh. He found evidence of other candidates occasionally. Abandoned camps, failed snares. Once, a body partially consumed by scavengers. The face was unrecognizable, but the scars were familiar. Leontis. He had been strong in training, but the mountains demanded different strength. Alexios took what useful items remained. The dead had no need of tools. As the month's end approached, new pressures emerged. The temptation to leave early, to seek the comfort of walls and fire and human voices. But leaving before the full month meant failure. It meant 13 years of training wasted. It meant shame worse than death. So, he endured, counted sunrises, marked days on a stone calendar. The final week brought the worst weather. Spring storms lashed the mountains with freezing rain. His shelters flooded, his carefully preserved meat spoiled. Everything that could go wrong did. This was no accident. The instructors had timed the trial for maximum hardship. Those final days would break anyone not truly prepared. Alexios survived by embracing misery. Wet became normal. Cold became expected. Hunger became comfortable as old clothing. He stopped fighting the conditions and flowed with them instead. This was the final lesson. Not conquering the mountains but becoming part of them. Not defeating nature but accepting his place within it. On the 29th night he made his choice. One more sunrise and he could return. Claim his place as a full citizen. Take up spear and shield in the phalanx. But something held him at the shelter. The mountains had become home in ways the barracks never were. Out here, he was purely himself. Not Alexios the student, not anyone's protégé. Just a man surviving by will and skill. He stayed an extra day, then another, testing whether citizenship mattered more than freedom. On the third extra day, hunger made the decision for him. His last snare was empty, his last roots consumed. The mountains had given all they would give. Time to return to the world of men. The journey back took 2 days of careful travel. He moved differently than a month ago. Part ghost, part predator, part of the mountain itself. When the barracks finally appeared below, they seemed alien. All those straight lines and rigid structures, all those rules and hierarchies. For a moment, he considered turning back. But promises made at 7 still bound him at 20. He descended toward the waiting instructors, knowing he was returning changed. The mountains had scraped away everything unnecessary. What remained was pure Spartan, or perhaps something even harder, something the citizenship ceremony would recognize but never fully own. The instructors waited at the gates, counting returning candidates. Fewer than had left, as always. They examined each survivor with practiced eyes, looking for signs of cheating, of weakness, of minds broken by isolation. Alexios stood before them naked except for the deer hide around his waist, his body mapped with new scars, his eyes holding depths they recognized. "Name," the senior instructor demanded. For a moment, Alexios almost couldn't remember. That person seemed dead, left somewhere in a rain-flooded shelter. But training ran deeper than conscious thought. Alexios, son of Nicias, returned from the mountains after 33 days. The instructor raised an eyebrow at the count. Most returned exactly at 30. Some came early in shame. Almost none stayed longer by choice. But the mountains didn't lie. The wear on his body testified to every claimed day. Report to the baths, then the healers. Tomorrow you join your brothers as a full citizen of Sparta. It should have felt like triumph. 13 years of brutality survived. Every test passed. The ultimate goal achieved. But Alexios felt only emptiness as he entered the barracks. The mountains had shown him something beyond what the Agoge taught, beyond what Sparta offered. He had survived the final trial, but at the cost of discovering that citizenship was just another cage. Tomorrow he would swear the oaths, take up the scarlet cloak, stand in the phalanx with men who had endured the same trials. But tonight, he mourned the wild thing he had been for 33 days in the mountains, the thing that needed no city, no brothers, no purpose beyond the next sunrise, because now they would expect him to create more boys like himself, and the cycle would begin again. The Spartans had a saying, "Come back with your shield or on it," 7 words that contained an entire civilization's approach to death. Not fear it, not avoid it. Make it serve the state even as your last breath escaped. This philosophy started young, carved into boys' minds through repetition and ritual, until dying badly became more terrifying than dying itself. Alexios stood in the mess hall at 14, watching an older boy named Arkadios receive news of his brother's death in battle. The messenger spoke 3 sentences. Your brother held the line at Ithome. He killed 6 before falling. His shield never touched ground. That was all. No comfort offered. No tears expected. Just facts delivered like ration counts. Arkadios nodded once and returned to his black broth. The meal continued. Conversations resumed. Death had visited their table and found no purchase for grief. This was Spartan emotional conditioning at its purest. Start with language. The way they spoke shaped the way they thought. Where Athenians crafted elaborate funeral orations, Spartans compressed everything into sharp fragments. Waste no words. Waste no feelings. Both were luxuries warriors couldn't afford. The laconic speech training began early but intensified after boys survived their first Krypteia missions. Having killed in darkness, they needed to speak about it in daylight without revealing operational details. Every word became a blade that could cut the speaker if handled carelessly. During formal instruction, the rhetoric master would pose scenarios. A mother asks about her son's death. Maximum 5 words for the response. A helot begs for mercy. 3 words to refuse. An ally requests reinforcements you cannot spare. 7 words to maintain honor while denying aid. Alexios excelled at this compression. When asked to describe his first kill, he managed it in 2 words. Necessary. Quick. The instructor nodded approval. Others struggled, trying to justify or explain. Those earned corrections delivered through wooden rods across knuckles. Brevity was not just style, it was survival. The mental conditioning went deeper than speech patterns. They learned to categorize all human connections by their service to Sparta. The state came first, always, without exception. Personal bonds existed only as they strengthened collective purpose. Brasidas demonstrated this during a loyalty exercise. He ordered Alexios to report another mentor pair for smuggling extra rations. The violation was minor. The punishment would be severe. 20 lashes each, minimum. Alexios hesitated, torn between obedience to his mentor and sympathy for fellow students. Your hesitation kills Spartans, Brasidas observed. His voice carried no judgment, just fact. In battle, that pause means broken lines, dead brothers, Persian victories. He waited 3 heartbeats. Choose now. Them or Sparta. The report was filed within the hour. Alexios watched the punishment delivered that evening, counting each lash against his conscience. The guilty pair took their strokes without sound. Afterward, one nodded to Alexios. Not forgiveness exactly. Understanding. He had chosen correctly. Personal feelings were secondary to collective discipline. This lesson repeated in variations throughout their training. Choose between friendship and duty, between comfort and strength, between individual desire and state need. The correct answer never changed. Sparta first, everything else distant second. The mess hall served as a laboratory for this conditioning. Seated by age groups, boys learned that eating was not about pleasure, but fuel. Conversation during meals followed strict patterns. No complaints, no preferences, no individual expression beyond tactical discussions. Alexios remembered his first violation of meal protocols. At 8, he had mentioned missing honeycakes from home. The silence that followed felt heavier than bronze. Every boy at his table received half rations for 3 days. His personal weakness had punished his brothers. The lesson burned deeper than any whip. Now at 14, he understood the system's genius. Make every violation collective punishment, transform individual desires into group shame. Within months, boys policed themselves more harshly than any instructor. The mere thought of personal expression became painful. Death training took specific forms. They practiced carrying wounded comrades until muscle failure. Not to save them, battlefield medicine was minimal, but to retrieve their shields and weapons. Equipment belonged to Sparta. Bodies were temporary vessels. Priorities had to be clear before real combat clouded judgment. During one exercise, teams competed to extract training dummies from a burning building. Points awarded for equipment recovered, not dummy condition. Several boys suffered serious burns trying to save bronze that would have been abandoned for wounded brothers. The instructor praised their priorities: Flesh healed or was replaced. Good bronze was eternal. The philosophical framework came through visiting teachers. Sparta might disdain most education, but they understood psychological warfare's value. Selected boys learned enough rhetoric to combat foreign ideas. Know your enemy included knowing their mental weaknesses. Alexios attended sessions where Athenian-trained speakers presented arguments for democracy, individual expression, artistic pursuit. The boys learned to dismantle these concepts with surgical precision. Freedom meant chaos. Art meant softness. Democracy meant the weak ruling the strong. Every outside idea became ammunition for reinforcing Spartan superiority. Physical conditioning supported mental programming. Pain tolerance exercises weren't just about enduring wounds. They rewired neural pathways. Make pain familiar, and it lost power. Make death familiar, and it became just another transition. The body taught lessons the mind absorbed. The whipping post served double duty. Yes, it punished failure, but it also created shared experience. Every citizen bore scars from the same source. Walking Sparta's streets, men recognized brothers not by face, but by whip patterns across backs, unique as fingerprints, common as breathing. Language drills progressed to more complex scenarios. Deliver battle reports that emphasized collective victory over individual heroics. Describe defeats that maintained morale while acknowledging reality. Every word choice mattered. Spartans who couldn't control their tongues couldn't control their spears. The mess hall conversations grew more sophisticated as boys aged. What seemed like casual talk was careful verbal fencing, testing loyalty, probing for weakness. Those who revealed too much personality found themselves isolated. Social death preceded physical death in the Agoge. Alexios learned to speak in negatives. Not afraid rather than brave. Not weak rather than strong. This linguistic trick embedded itself so deeply that positive self-description became almost impossible. Even thinking in terms of personal achievement felt foreign. The language shaped the thoughts, shaped the man. Group psychology exercises pushed boundaries further. Entire cohorts would be punished for one boy's excellence. Stand out too much, and your brothers suffered. The message was clear. Sparta needed identical warriors, not heroes. Heroes thought themselves special. Special got people killed. Death's constant presence meant developing particular humor. Spartans laughed at what horrified others. A boy losing fingers to frostbite might joke about needing less help counting. Another vomiting from exhaustion would claim he was making room for more black broth. Transform horror to humor. Rob death of dignity. The mental walls built through this training were nearly impenetrable. By 15, most boys couldn't articulate personal desires beyond serving Sparta. The concept of individual happiness became as foreign as Persian customs. They existed as components of a larger machine. Cogs didn't dream. Memory training reinforced state loyalty. They memorized the names of every Spartan who died gloriously in battle. 300 at Thermopylae became personal ancestors, regardless of blood relation. But boys who failed training vanished from memory completely. Weakness was not just punished but erased. Alexios noticed how his own thinking had changed. Where once he might have described sunset as beautiful, now he saw only tactical implications. Night approach, visibility reduced, attack windows opening. Beauty was inefficient. Appreciation was weakness. Everything filtered through utility. The culmination came through death rehearsals. Not just accepting mortality but practicing for it. Boys learned exactly how long blood loss took to kill from various wounds. They practiced final words. Always about Sparta, never about self. Death became technical rather than emotional. One afternoon, instructors brought a dying warrior to the mess hall. Gut wound from a border skirmish. Beyond healing, he used his last hour's teaching, showed them how organs failed in sequence, described each stage of approaching death with clinical precision. When he finally died, mid-sentence about kidney shutdown, the lesson continued. They dissected the corpse. Education never stopped. This was love in Sparta. Training boys to die properly was the greatest gift. Individual consciousness was the enemy, dissolved through language, ritual, and relentless conditioning. The state thought through them. The state spoke through them. When they died, only the state would mourn the loss of useful tools. Alexios felt his individual self hollowing out, replaced by something harder and emptier. The boy who had cried for his mother at 7 was dead. The boy who had stolen food for himself at 10 was dead. What remained was barely human in any way other Greeks would recognize, which was exactly what Sparta required. The mental conditioning never stopped. Even sleep brought dreams of phalanx formations and bronze rhythms. Private thoughts became suspicious. Personal desires became shameful. The transformation was so complete most never realized what they had lost. You cannot miss what you cannot remember having. But the system had flaws. Pressure that created perfect warriors also created perfect breaking points. Some boys snapped completely, their minds rejecting the programming through madness or suicide. These failures were studied carefully. Too much pressure here. Not enough there. The machine adjusted and continued. Because Sparta needed warriors who would hold the line while intestines spilled from opened bellies, who would advance into certain death because retreat dishonored the state, who would kill their own sons if they showed cowardice. This required more than training. It required rewriting the human soul. Alexios understood this as he watched younger boys begin their own transformation, saw their eyes deaden as personalities were crushed out, felt satisfaction rather than pity. They were being freed from the burden of self. Soon they too would know the peace of existing only as Sparta's instruments. But late at night, in moments between sleep and waking, something else stirred. Fragments of the boy he had been, memories of wanting things for himself. These terrified him more than any Persian army, because they suggested the conditioning was imperfect, that somewhere inside an individual still existed. He shared these fears with no one, not even Brasidas, especially not Brasidas. Such thoughts were treason of the highest order, but they persisted, growing stronger even as his external compliance became perfect. The gap between inner reality and outer performance widened into a chasm. This was the system's deepest success. Even those who doubted could never voice it. The language didn't exist. The concepts had been carved away. They could feel something was wrong but had no words to describe it, no framework to understand it. Trapped in mental cages they couldn't even see. Years later, when Alexios stood in the phalanx for the first time, shield locked with brothers, he felt the programming's full power. His individual terror dissolved into collective purpose. His body moved without conscious thought. His spear found targets his mind didn't choose. He had become the weapon Sparta forged. But that was still to come. At 14 he simply memorized death songs and practiced final words. Learned to speak of killing with the same emotion used for weather observations. Felt his humanity drain away drop by careful drop, and counted it victory because the alternative was unthinkable. This system created the perfect warriors, but at a cost that would eventually destroy Sparta itself. The numbers never lied in Sparta. 700 boys entered the Agoge each year. Maybe 400 made it to 20. The rest vanished like morning mist on Mount Taygetos. Some died cleanly in training accidents. Others broke under pressure and disappeared into the night. Most simply faded away, their names erased from memory as completely as their bodies vanished from the barracks. Alexios understood this mathematics now at 14, watching a boy named Orthios fail his third combat evaluation. The instructors didn't announce failures. They simply stopped acknowledging the boy existed. No name called during morning formation. No space at the mess table. No sleeping platform assigned. Orthios stood in the training yard for 2 days, waiting for orders that would never come. The other boys stepped around him like he was furniture. This was the cruelest punishment. Not death, not exile. Complete erasure while still breathing. On the third morning, Orthios was gone. Whether he left voluntarily or received midnight assistance remained unspoken. Failed Spartans had no stories worth telling. The selection process never stopped. Every exercise eliminated someone. Every meal revealed weakness. The boy who vomited during forced marches found his rations cut. When he couldn't maintain pace on reduced food, they cut rations further. A spiral designed to remove those lacking the baseline resilience Sparta required. Physical failures were easiest to spot. Alexios watched a 12-year-old named Theophilus struggle with bronze shield drills. The aspis weighed 30 pounds. Adult weight for child arms. Most boys adapted through suffering. Theophilus's left shoulder had separated during a wrestling accident. It never healed properly. Each shield raise brought visible agony. The instructors offered no accommodation. Sparta didn't adjust standards for individual limitation. The phalanx required every man to hold his shield high enough to protect the soldier beside him. Personal pain meant nothing against collective need. Theophilus lasted another month before his arm simply stopped responding to mental commands. They carried him to the medical quarters not for treatment but for assessment. The healers confirmed what everyone knew: permanent damage, unfit for hoplite service. That afternoon, his possessions were distributed among his age group. By evening, fresh straw covered his sleeping platform. A new boy would claim it soon. Mental breakdown took longer but cut deeper. The mind could endure what the body couldn't, but when it finally shattered, the pieces never fit together again. Alexios had seen boys start talking to shadows. Others forgot their own names. Some became violent without warning, attacking brothers during peaceful moments. These earned swift removal before their madness infected others. The statistics were brutal because the system was designed for brutality. Sparta needed 3,000 active warriors to maintain control over hundreds of thousands of helots. Each warrior had to be perfect. Not good, not adequate. Perfect. The mathematics demanded extreme selection pressure. Brasidas explained it during one of their private training sessions. We lose 2/3 reaching citizenship. Of those who make it, half die in their first real battle. Another quarter are crippled beyond use within 5 years. He paused to let Alexios calculate. From 700 7-year-olds, maybe 50 become veteran warriors. The system works because it must work. Not all failures were obvious. Some boys mastered every physical challenge but lacked the essential coldness. They felt too much, hesitated when orders demanded instant brutality. These often lasted longest, their competence masking fatal flaws until crisis revealed them. Alexios remembered Nicias, brilliant at tactics and stronger than boys 2 years older. He excelled until his first Krypteia mission required killing a helot woman. She was guilty. The evidence was clear. But she reminded him of someone. Her aunt. A sister, seen years ago. His blade hesitated for 3 heartbeats. Long enough for her to scream. Long enough to alert the village. The mission failed. 2 other boys were injured in the chaotic retreat. Nicias returned unharmed physically but destroyed inside. He completed 3 more years of training in mechanical perfection. Then one morning his platform was empty. The instructors found him in the mountains, self-inflicted wounds telling their own story. Weakness found its own solutions. Some tried to hide their breaking points. Alexios knew boys who practiced smiling while bones broke. Others developed elaborate mental frameworks to justify what they were becoming. These lasted longer, but fell harder when reality finally penetrated their defenses. The mess hall conversations included casual discussions of former brothers who hadn't survived. No sentiment, just tactical analysis of what went wrong. Dorian talked too much, revealed doubts. Callias showed favoritism during team selections. Megacles cried after killing his first helot. Each failure became a teaching moment for survivors. The irony was that many who failed would have been elite warriors anywhere else. Athens would have welcomed their tactical minds. Corinth would have valued their strength. But Sparta demanded more than excellence. It demanded transformation so complete that human became weapon. Not everyone could pay that price. Alexios began recognizing the signs early. The way a boy's eyes went distant during formation. How hands trembled not from exhaustion but from internal conflict. The careful way some began avoiding certain exercises. Once you knew the patterns, failure became predictable. He reported these observations to Brasidas. Not from cruelty but from mercy. Better to fail early than break completely later. The weak contaminated the strong if allowed to linger. Clean cuts healed fastest. This logic governed everything in Spartan selection. The Agoge's genius lay in creating multiple failure points. Survive the hunger but break under pain. Master pain but crumble beneath psychological pressure. Excel individually but fail at collective action. Every boy had unique breaking points. The system found them all. Some failures surprised everyone. Alexios watched a promising 16-year-old named Philippos dominate his age group for years. Strong, smart, utterly committed. Then, during a night exercise, something snapped. He began laughing at nothing. Wouldn't stop. The laughter grew hysterical, infecting others with its wrongness. They sedated him with wine and herbs. He never returned to training. Physical deformities emerged slowly. Backs bent wrong from years of carrying adult equipment, joints that gave out from repeated stress, internal damage from starvation diets. These boys might have continued with modifications, but Sparta didn't modify. You met the standard or vanished. The psychological damage was harder to measure. Every survivor carried invisible wounds. The difference between success and failure was whether those wounds strengthened or weakened. Some boys learned to transform trauma into armor. Others let it fester until infection took their minds. Age-based attrition followed predictable patterns. The first year claimed those too soft for basic conditioning. Years 3 through 5 eliminated those who couldn't adapt to hunger and cold. Years 7 through 10 broke those lacking mental flexibility. The teenage years destroyed those who felt too deeply. Each phase selected for different strengths. Alexios survived by studying failure as carefully as success. What made Orthios break where Procles endured? Why did some minds shatter from acts others performed without hesitation? Understanding failure patterns meant avoiding them. The system's cruelty had logic. A warrior who broke in training might break in battle. When that happened in phalanx formation, gaps opened. Brothers died, battles lost. Better to identify weakness early. Better to cull the uncertain before they cost certain lives. Sometimes entire age groups failed together. Alexios heard whispers of a year when winter killed 30 boys in one night. Instructors had pushed too hard, miscalculated endurance against conditions. The lesson was studied, adjustments made. The machine learned from its mistakes. But individual failures taught more than mass casualties. Each boy who broke revealed system limits. Too much isolation created madness. Too little food prevented muscle development. Too much pain too young created numbness rather than resilience. The balance was delicate, the margins for error non-existent. Failed Spartans had 3 destinations. The lucky ones died in training. Clean ends to stories that couldn't continue. Others disappeared into exile, forbidden from returning on pain of death. The remainder lived as perioeci, free but never citizens. Constant reminders of what failure looked like. Alexios encountered one such failure in the city market. A man perhaps 25, clearly Agoge trained by his bearing, but something in his eyes was wrong. Too soft, too human. He sold pottery with skilled hands that should have held a spear. Their eyes met briefly. The recognition was mutual. The shame was his alone. This was the price of creating perfect warriors. For every man who stood in the phalanx, 2 or 3 were broken and discarded. Their sacrifice was unnamed, but essential. They taught through failure what success required. Their weakness highlighted strength by contrast. The numerical reality was stark. From thousands of boys entering over the decades, only hundreds emerged as full citizens. The failed became statistics without names. Their mothers never asked what happened. Their fathers erased them from family memories. Sparta moved forward on the bones of its broken children. Some instructors kept mental tallies of their failures, not from guilt but from professional interest. Which training methods broke the most students? Which age groups were most vulnerable? This wasn't cruelty, it was optimization, fine-tuning the machine for maximum efficiency with acceptable losses. Alexios realized he had unconsciously begun similar calculations. Watching new 7-year-olds arrive, he could predict with disturbing accuracy which would survive. The tells were subtle but consistent. How they stood, how they breathed under stress, how quickly they abandoned individual identity for collective purpose. This knowledge was power but also burden. Seeing future corpses in children's faces changed how you viewed the system. The successful learned to stop seeing individuals entirely. Bodies were temporary. The system was eternal. Only Sparta truly mattered. Late at night, when exhaustion loosened mental discipline, Alexios sometimes wondered about the mathematics. Was creating one perfect warrior worth destroying 2 or 3 imperfect ones? But dawn always brought clarity. The question itself revealed dangerous thinking. Sparta had calculated correctly. The proof stood in their undefeated record. Still, the ghosts accumulated. Empty platforms, unused equipment, spaces in formations that closed as seamlessly as wounds. The successful pretended not to notice, but everyone kept private counts. Everyone knew names they weren't supposed to remember. The failed left marks even in erasure. The ultimate irony was that many failures came from the system's success. Boys broken by trying too hard, minds shattered by perfect compliance, bodies destroyed by exceeding every expectation until nothing remained. These failures were harder to dismiss. They had done everything right and still paid the price. Alexios watched another boy disappear that winter. Lysias, 13 years old. No obvious weaknesses, no dramatic breakdown. Simply stopped eating one day. When asked, he couldn't explain why. The food was there, his body was capable, but his mind had disconnected from survival needs. He faded over weeks while instructors watched with clinical interest. Another data point in failure's taxonomy. The survivors developed necessary blindness. You learned not to attach to anyone showing weakness signs. Emotional investment in the doomed was wastage. Better to focus on those who would stand beside you in the phalanx. The mathematics of survival were ruthless but clear. Yet every empty platform raised the same questions. What if the training was calibrated differently? What if standards bent slightly for exceptional cases? But these thoughts led nowhere useful. Sparta was what it was because it tolerated no modifications. The system's strength was its absoluteness. Alexios understood now why citizens rarely discussed their training years, not from trauma but from mathematics. To acknowledge the fallen was to question the system. To question the system was to weaken it. To weaken it was to invite destruction. Better to pretend those empty platforms had never held brothers. But pretending had limits. When summer brought the citizenship trials, everyone knew the count. How many had started this journey together? How many remained? The numbers told their own story of necessary sacrifice. Victory built on acceptable losses. The final test loomed ahead. Some who had survived everything would still fail there. The mountains were honest judges. They revealed what 13 years of training might have missed. And for those who succeeded, the knowledge would forever shadow their triumph. They stood on ground fertilized by fallen brothers. This was the price Sparta paid for perfection. Not gold or silver, but lives. Young lives. Promising lives. Lives that might have bloomed elsewhere but were cut down here in service to an ideal. The survivors carried this knowledge like hidden scars. Never acknowledged. Always present. Which brings us back to that courtyard, where a 13-year-old boy refuses to cry out as the whip falls again. The whip cracked for the 20th time. Blood ran in thick streams now, pooling where Alexios gripped the post. His knuckles had gone past white to purple. The paidonomos paused, breathing heavy in the pre-dawn air. Around the courtyard, 50 boys maintained perfect stillness. Not one shuffled, not one looked away. Strike 21 landed across wounds already laid open. The sound had changed completely now. Wet, leather meeting, exposed muscle. In the front row, that 7-year-old who had bitten through his lip finally understood. This wasn't punishment. This was graduation. The mathematics were simple. 40 lashes for theft. Alexios had taken 21 without sound. 19 more to prove himself worthy of the training invested in him. The paidonomos raised his arm again. Dawn light caught the bronze studs, still dripping. 22, 23, 24. Each strike wrote its own lesson across flesh that would never forget. The watching boys absorbed every detail. How legs could shake without buckling. How breath could continue when lungs screamed for release. How silence could speak louder than any scream. They were witnessing transformation in its purest form. At 30 lashes, something shifted. Alexios's body stopped fighting the pain. Acceptance flooded through muscles that had battled every previous strike. The whip became rhythm. His heartbeat synchronized with impact. This was the state beyond endurance that instructors spoke of but never explained. The paidonomos noticed immediately. His next strikes carried different weight, the acknowledgement rather than punishment. He was no longer breaking a boy who stole bread. He was completing a warrior who had learned to steal everything, including victory from the jaws of agony. 35, 36, 37. Blood loss made the world shimmer at edges, but Alexios held position through will alone. In 3 years, he would stand at Thermopylae's gates. He would hold while Persian arrows darkened the Sunday. He would joke about fighting in shade while bronze pierced his guts. But that future warrior was being born right now, one lash at a time. The final strikes fell like hammer blows. 38, 39, 40. Silence heavier than mountain stone settled over the courtyard. Alexios released the post slowly, testing whether legs would support him. They did, barely. But in Sparta, barely was enough if it meant standing. The paidonomos stepped back, studying his work with professional satisfaction. 40 perfect strokes. Not one had missed its mark. Not one had been gentle. The boy's back looked like a map of rivers drawn in red. But he stood, and he had never made a sound. Dismissed to quarters, the paidonomos announced to the watching formation. They filed out in perfect order, but their eyes lingered on Alexios. Tomorrow, some would face their own tests. They had just learned what passing looked like. Alexios walked without assistance. Each step sent fire through his body. Each breath pulled wounds wider. But walking alone mattered more than pain. Always would. The other boys parted before him, creating a path born from respect rather than sympathy. In the washroom, he cleaned his wounds with wine that burned worse than the whip. No healers for punishment injuries. That was the rule. You endured what you earned. The bronze mirror showed a back transformed into abstract art. These scars would never fully fade. Good. They were his diploma from an education that killed most students. Proclus appeared with clean cloth and binding salve. Neither boy spoke during the treatment. Words would cheapen what had passed. But Proclus's hands were steady and sure. He had learned wound care through necessity. They all had. Outside, dawn broke fully over Sparta. The city stirred to life, unaware that another boy had just died in that courtyard. What emerged was something harder. Something that understood pain as a teaching tool rather than an enemy. Something that would hold a line while brothers fell around him. But the lesson went deeper than individual transformation. Later that morning, as Alexios returned to training despite wounds that wept through their bindings, younger boys watched with new understanding. The system revealed itself through such moments. Not through instruction but demonstration. The whip taught one boy to endure. His endurance taught 50 others what endurance looked like. This was how Sparta manufactured warriors from terrified children. Not through any single method, but through layers of pressure applied with scientific precision. Starvation taught resourcefulness. Cold taught adaptation. Pain taught transcendence. Each lesson built on the last, until human became weapon. The Agoge didn't break children. That was what outsiders never understood. It revealed what was already broken and either fixed it or discarded it. Every boy who entered those gates at 7 carried weaknesses. Fear, selfishness, softness. The system found these flaws with surgical precision. Some boys shattered at first contact. Others lasted years before revealing fatal cracks. But those who survived emerged reforged, not broken and rebuilt, revealed and refined. The process was hideous in its efficiency. Modern minds would call it abuse. Ancient minds called it necessary. When your entire civilization balanced on 3,000 warriors, holding back hundreds of thousands of potential enemies, you couldn't afford weakness. Every soft boy who became a hard man represented survival for the state. The genius lay in making the boys complicit in their own transformation. They weren't passive victims, but active participants. They reported each other's weaknesses. They enforced standards more harshly than any instructor. They chose to endure rather than quit, because quitting meant worse than death. It meant erasure. Other Greek cities produced soldiers, citizens who could fight when needed. Sparta produced something different. Living weapons, who existed only to perfect the art of killing and dying for the state. The distinction mattered when phalanxes met on dusty fields. An Athenian hoplite fought to return to his family. A Spartan warrior fought because fighting was his family. Home was wherever his brothers stood. Peace was just preparation for war. This psychological difference won battles before bronze ever rang on bronze. The cost was everything we might call human. Spartans couldn't create art because beauty served no tactical purpose. They couldn't pursue philosophy because questioning weakened certainty. They couldn't even speak without weighing each word for maximum impact with minimum waste. They had traded their humanity for something else. Perfection within narrow parameters. Absolute excellence at one task. They were history's most specialized humans, refined down to pure function, and it worked exactly as designed. For 3 centuries, Sparta dominated through reputation as much as reality. Enemies fled rather than face the crimson line. Cities surrendered rather than test themselves against men who treated death like a casual acquaintance. The sight of lambda shields, advancing in perfect synchronization, ended wars before they began. This was the return on investment for every boy who broke in training, every mind that shattered under pressure, every body that gave out during the selection process. Their failures purchased success for those who survived. Mathematics written in generations of suffering. But perfection in one area meant deficiency in others. Sparta produced no poets except those who sang of war, no architects except those who built fortifications, no philosophers except those who justified the system. They had optimized so completely for combat that they forgot how to do anything else. When the world changed, when warfare evolved beyond phalanx battles, Sparta couldn't adapt. Their perfect warriors became obsolete antiques. The system that created them was too rigid to produce anything different. They had built a civilization on one skill and never developed another. The boys suffering in the Agoge couldn't see this future. They only knew the immediate reality of survival. Each day brought new tests. Each year carved away more humanity. By the time they realized what they'd become, it was too late to become anything else. This was Sparta's tragedy. They succeeded too completely, created warriors so perfect that they couldn't create anything else, won every battle until battles no longer mattered, dominated through fear until fear wasn't enough. But in that courtyard, watching a 13-year-old take 40 lashes in silence, none of that mattered. There was only the immediate lesson. Pain could be conquered. Weakness could be carved away. Boys could become something more and less than human. Alexios would live to fight at Thermopylae. He would die on his feet, still holding formation, while Persian spears found every gap in his armor. His last words would be about shield position, not family, not fear, just technical observations about defensive spacing. He would die perfectly, exactly as the Agoge trained him to die. And in that perfect death, both the triumph and tragedy of Sparta would be complete. They had taken a child who cried for his mother and transformed him into a man who thought only of formation integrity while his life bled out into foreign soil. No other civilization ever succeeded so completely at such a narrow goal. No other system ever demanded such a price for such specific returns. The Agoge stands alone in history, a machine for manufacturing warriors that worked exactly as intended. Perhaps that's the most terrifying part. Not that it was cruel. History overflows with cruelty. Not that it destroyed children. Every era has its horrors, but that it succeeded. That the mathematics worked. That you really could take 7-year-old boys and transform them into weapons through calculated suffering. The Spartan Agoge didn't just train warriors. It proved something dark about human nature. With enough pressure, applied correctly, you can reshape anything, even a child's soul, even basic humanity. The only question is whether the end result is worth the price. Sparta thought it was. History records their victories and their eventual defeat. But in between those points stand generations of boys like Alexios. Boys who entered the gates as children and emerged as something else. Boys who paid the price for a civilization's twisted vision of perfection. The whip that fell 40 times in that courtyard created more than just a warrior. It created proof that humans can be engineered through suffering, that weakness can be carved away with enough precision, that boys can be transformed into weapons if you're willing to destroy everything else they might have been. The Spartan Agoge didn't just train warriors, it manufactured them from the raw material of terrified children, creating a military machine so effective that 2,500 years later, we still can't decide whether to admire or be horrified by what they achieved.